Part 1. The Devil's Sea. The shimmering turquoise expanse of the Atlantic Ocean holds secrets. Vast, unknowable depths conceal the wreckage of dreams, the echoes of vanished souls. Among these mysteries, perhaps none captures the imagination quite like the Bermuda Triangle, a region steeped in legend, where the veil between our reality and the unknown seems precariously thin. For centuries, whispers have persisted of ships disappearing without a trace, of aircraft vanishing into thin air, leaving behind only a chilling silence. Rational explanations abound, from rogue waves and unpredictable weather patterns to human error and magnetic anomalies. But what if, beneath the surface of these seemingly plausible explanations, lies something far more profound? What if the Bermuda Triangle isn't simply a dangerous stretch of ocean, but a gateway, a portal, a rip in the fabric of spacetime? The area, sometimes referred to as the Devil's Sea, is roughly defined by points connecting Bermuda, Puerto Rico, and the tip of Florida, forming a loosely triangular shape. Within this zone, a disproportionate number of unexplained disappearances have been documented, stretching back centuries. Christopher Columbus himself, on his maiden voyage to the New World, reported strange compass readings and sightings of unexplained lights in the very region we now call the Bermuda Triangle. Were these the first recorded hints of something anomalous at play? Were these early explorers brushing up against the edges of a dimensional anomaly, a glimpse into another reality? Modern accounts add to the mystique. The vanishing of Flight 19 in 1945, a squadron of 5 Navy Avenger torpedo bombers, remains a cornerstone of the Bermuda Triangle legend. Despite extensive searches, no wreckage was ever found, and the circumstances surrounding their disappearance remain shrouded in mystery. The official report attributed the loss to causes or reasons unknown, a chillingly vague conclusion that only fueled speculation. Could these highly trained pilots have simply become disoriented? Or did they stumble into a dimensional rift, their aircraft plucked from our reality, leaving no physical trace behind? Theories surrounding the Bermuda Triangle are as diverse and enigmatic as the disappearances themselves. Some suggest the presence of methane gas hydrates on the seabed, which, when released, could create pockets of low-density water, causing ships to sink rapidly and without warning. While scientifically plausible, this theory fails to account for the vanishing of aircraft. Others point to the area's unique magnetic properties, claiming that compass variations could disorient navigators and lead them astray. But could magnetic anomalies explain the complete and utter disappearance of vessels, leaving no debris field, no SOS signal, no final communication? Then there are the more esoteric theories. Some believe the area is a vortex of energy, a point where Earth's magnetic field intersects with powerful telluric currents, creating a swirling portal to another dimension. Could the lost ships and aircraft have been drawn into this vortex, transported to a realm beyond our comprehension? Legends of Atlantis, the mythical lost city, also intertwine with the Bermuda Triangle mystery. Some speculate that remnants of Atlantean technology, perhaps advanced crystal power grids, are responsible for the strange phenomena observed in the area. Could these remnants emit energies that disrupt our physical laws, causing objects to vanish into thin air? The idea of dimensional gateways, while seemingly fantastical, holds a certain allure. Quantum physics, in its exploration of the subatomic realm, has revealed a universe far stranger and more complex than we ever imagined. The existence of multiple dimensions, once relegated to the realm of science fiction, is now a serious topic of scientific discourse. String theory, for example, postulates the existence of 10 or even 11 dimensions, curled up and hidden within the fabric of our four-dimensional spacetime. Could the Bermuda Triangle be a point where these hidden dimensions bleed through, a place where the veil between realities is thin enough to allow passage? The very nature of reality itself is under constant scrutiny. Our perception of the world is filtered through our senses, limited by our understanding of the laws of physics. But what if these laws are not universal, but rather local to our specific dimension? What if other dimensions exist with different physical laws, where the very concept of time and space may be radically different? The Bermuda Triangle, with its baffling disappearances and unexplained phenomena, could be a tantalizing glimpse into this larger, more complex reality. It could be a window into the unknown, a doorway to dimensions beyond our wildest imaginings. And the question remains, what lies on the other side? The silence stretched, broken only by the creak of the aging sailboat and the rhythmic slap of waves against the hull. Amelia gripped the railing, her knuckles white, staring at the compass. It spun wildly, the needle twitching like a frantic insect. Yesterday, it had pointed steadfastly north. Now, it was a useless, quivering mess. The sun beat down, the sky is sickly, unnatural yellow, devoid of clouds. The air itself felt heavy, charged with an unseen energy. "This isn't right," she murmured, more to herself than to Ben. He stood at the helm, his face grim, a sheen of sweat glistening on his brow. "No," he agreed, his voice tight. "It isn't. We should be well past this point. The charts," he gestured towards the rolled-up maps scattered on the deck, their edges curling in the oppressive humidity. "They're useless now." The radio, which had sputtered and died yesterday afternoon, remained stubbornly silent. They were alone, adrift in a sea that felt increasingly alien. The familiar turquoise of the Caribbean had shifted to a deep, inky indigo, so dark it seemed to absorb the sunlight. Amelia glanced back towards the horizon. A shimmering haze clung to the water's edge, a distortion that twisted the air and made the distant waves appear to undulate in impossible ways. She'd noticed it earlier, a subtle aberration, but now it was more pronounced, creeping closer. A prickle of unease danced across her skin, and a cold dread settled in the pit of her stomach. "Ben," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Look." He followed her gaze, his eyes widening. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. The shimmering haze was now close, barely a mile away, and it wasn't just a distortion of light. Within its swirling depths, shapes began to form, indistinct and fleeting, like phantoms in a dream. They were angles, sharp and jagged, that defied Euclidean geometry. Colors pulsed and shifted within the haze, hues that didn't exist in the natural world. Vibrant violets that bordered on ultraviolet, greens that shimmered with an inner luminescence, and a sickening, pulsing yellow that seemed to vibrate against the retina. The air grew colder, a sharp contrast to the oppressive heat of moments ago. A low hum resonated through the boat, vibrating through the hull and up into their bones. Amelia felt a tingling sensation spread across her skin, as though static electricity were building in the air. "We have to get out of here," Ben finally managed, his voice strained. He spun the wheel, trying to steer the sailboat away from the encroaching haze, but the rudder seemed unresponsive, as if the water itself had solidified. "It's no use," Amelia said, her voice filled with a chilling resignation. "We're caught in it." The haze enveloped them, swallowing the boat whole. The humming intensified, becoming a deafening roar that vibrated in their skulls. The world around them dissolved into a chaotic swirl of colors and shapes, twisting and contorting, defying all logic and reason. Amelia closed her eyes, bracing herself for the unknown. When she opened them again, the world had changed. The familiar blue of the sky was gone, replaced by a swirling vortex of crimson and emerald. The sea, once a familiar expanse of water, was now a churning, iridescent liquid that pulsed with an eerie luminescence. Strange, crystalline formations jutted from its surface, casting long, distorted shadows in the unnatural light. The boat was gone. Amelia found herself standing on a solid, obsidian-like surface that stretched out in all directions. Ben stood beside her, his face pale, his eyes wide with a mixture of awe and terror. They were no longer in the Caribbean. They were somewhere else. A shape coalesced in the distance, shimmering and shifting, taking on a vaguely humanoid form. It was tall and slender, its limbs elongated and impossibly thin. Its skin seemed to be composed of the same swirling colors as the sky, constantly shifting and changing. It moved towards them, gliding effortlessly across the obsidian surface, leaving no footprints. Amelia wanted to scream, to run, but she found herself frozen in place, her muscles locked, her voice trapped in her throat. The creature stopped a few feet away, its form solidifying, resolving into a face that was both alien and unsettlingly familiar. Its eyes, large and black, seemed to bore into her soul, stripping away her defenses, exposing her deepest fears. A voice, not heard but felt, resonated within her mind, cold and ancient, speaking in a language she didn't understand yet somehow comprehended. "Welcome," it said. "To the in-between." The chilling realization washed over Amelia. The Bermuda Triangle wasn't just a dimensional gateway. It was a prison, and they were its newest inmates. What if the Bermuda Triangle is a dimensional gateway? Part 3. The radio crackled again, a guttural, distorted voice breaking through the static. It wasn't English, nor any language I recognized. It sounded organic, like the rustling of leaves amplified 1,000 times, punctuated by clicks and pops that resembled breaking bones. Javier, pale as bone, slammed his fist against the receiver, but the voice persisted, a low, resonant thrum vibrating the very hull of the boat. Fear, cold and viscous, coiled in my stomach. We were alone, miles from anywhere, adrift in a sea that felt increasingly alien. The once familiar horizon had taken on a strange, shimmering quality, like a heat haze on a desert road, but colder, somehow. The sun, still high in the sky, cast an unsettlingly weak light, unable to penetrate the growing sense of dread that hung heavy in the air. "We need to get out of here," Javier rasped, his eyes wide with a terror mirroring my own. He fumbled with the ignition, turning the key with frantic desperation. The engine sputtered, coughed, and then died, leaving an unnerving silence in its wake. "No, no, no." Javier slammed his fist on the console, a choked sob escaping his lips. "We tried everything. We checked the fuel lines, the battery, everything we could think of, but the engine remained stubbornly silent. We were adrift, at the mercy of whatever malevolent force had seized control of our reality." The unsettling voice on the radio intensified, no longer just a murmur, but a series of rhythmic pulses, like a monstrous heartbeat. The shimmering on the horizon grew more pronounced, the air itself seeming to vibrate in time with the pulsating sound. Then, we saw it. A shape, vast and impossible, began to coalesce from the shimmering haze. It wasn't a ship, or a plane, or anything remotely recognizable. It was angular, yet fluid, like a geometric figure struggling to maintain its form in a world that couldn't comprehend its existence. It shifted and pulsed, its edges blurring against the sky, its color an impossible shade of deep violet that seemed to absorb the light around it. A wave of nausea washed over me, the sheer wrongness of the thing making my stomach churn. Javier, eyes fixed on the approaching monstrosity, let out a low, keening wail. "What is that?" he whispered, his voice barely audible above the pulsating radio. I didn't answer. I couldn't. Words felt inadequate, meaningless in the face of such cosmic horror. The pulsating sound intensified, resonating deep within my chest, making my teeth ache. The violet shape grew larger, closer, its form becoming more defined, revealing intricate patterns that shifted and writhed across its surface. It was as if reality itself was warping, bending to accommodate this alien intruder. Then, the radio fell silent. The pulsating stopped. The only sound was the gentle lapping of the waves against the hull of our now useless boat. The silence, after the cacophony, was even more terrifying. It felt pregnant with anticipation, the quiet before a storm of unimaginable proportions. The violet shape hung in the air above us, casting a long, unnatural shadow that engulfed the boat. Within its shifting form, I thought I could see openings, like windows into another dimension. And from those openings, something was looking back. They weren't eyes, not in any conventional sense. They were more like voids, blacker than the darkest night, radiating an ancient, unknowable intelligence. They fixed on us, and a wave of pure, unadulterated terror washed over me, so potent it almost paralyzed me. It was a fear that transcended the physical, a primal dread that struck at the very core of my being. Javier, next to me, had collapsed, his face contorted in a mask of terror, his body convulsing. I wanted to scream, to run, to do anything but face the inevitable, but I was frozen, trapped in the gaze of those impossible voids. Slowly, the violet shape began to descend, the openings within it widening, revealing glimpses of a landscape beyond human comprehension. It was a world of twisted geometries and impossible colors, a realm where the laws of physics seemed to hold no sway. And from that alien world, something was reaching out. Tentacles, thin and iridescent, snaked out from the openings, probing the air like the feelers of some gigantic insect. They moved with an unnerving grace, their tips shimmering with an otherworldly light. One of the tentacles brushed against my arm, and a jolt of pure energy surged through my body, making every muscle spasm. I felt a searing pain, followed by a strange, euphoric numbness. The tentacles coiled around Javier, lifting him effortlessly from the deck of the boat. He let out a strangled cry, a sound that was quickly swallowed by the oppressive silence of the sea. I watched in horrified fascination as he was drawn towards one of the openings, his body contorting and shrinking as he was pulled into the alien dimension. Then, the tentacles turned towards me. I closed my eyes, bracing for the inevitable. The image of Javier's screaming face burned into my mind. This was it. This was the end. I was about to be dragged into the unknown, to become another victim of the dimensional gateway that masquerades as the Bermuda Triangle. And the worst part? No one would ever believe what happened. The chilling hum intensified, vibrating through the deck and into our bones. The air crackled with an unseen energy, the smell of ozone sharp in our nostrils. The churning vortex in the sea, once a distant spectacle, was now a gaping maw consuming the horizon. The sky, a swirling canvas of impossible colors, pressed down on us, heavy with the weight of the unknown. Captain Henderson, his face a mask of grim determination, gripped the helm. His knuckles, white as bone, betrayed the fear gnawing at him. "Hold fast!" he roared over the wind, his voice barely audible above the escalating cacophony. "We're going through. Going through." The words echoed the horrifying realization that had gripped us all. We weren't just observing a phenomenon, we were about to become a part of it. I clung to the railing, the metal cold and slick beneath my clammy hands. Beside me, Professor Armitage muttered a frantic prayer, his eyes fixed on the vortex. The world began to distort. Straight lines bent and twisted, the familiar constellations in the sky rearranged themselves into bizarre, alien patterns. The sea itself seemed to boil, its surface bubbling with an iridescent, otherworldly light. The air shimmered, and through the shimmering, I saw glimpses of something else. Landscapes alien and unsettling, fleeting visions of twisted trees under a violet sun, cities of impossible architecture reaching toward a sky filled with swirling nebulae. Then, with a lurch that threw us all to the deck, the sea serpent plunged into the heart of the vortex. The world exploded in a kaleidoscope of blinding light and deafening sound. A sensation of falling, of being ripped apart and put back together, overwhelmed me. I squeezed my eyes shut, my stomach churning, my breath caught in my throat. Then, as suddenly as it began, the chaos ceased. I cautiously opened my eyes. The humming was gone, replaced by an unnerving silence. The turbulent sea had calmed to an unnatural stillness, reflecting a sky that was no longer the familiar blue of Earth. It was a deep, unsettling indigo, streaked with bands of emerald and crimson. The air was thick and heavy, carrying a sweet, metallic scent that made me nauseous. We were still on the sea serpent asterisk, but the world around us was different. Utterly, terrifyingly different. The sea stretched out to the horizon, an oily, obsidian expanse. In the distance, jagged, black peaks pierced the indigo sky, their summits wreathed in a perpetual, swirling mist. There was no sign of land, no other ships, no birds, no life of any kind that I could recognize. A wave of despair washed over me. We were lost. Lost in a place that shouldn't exist. Captain Henderson, his face ashen, stared at the alien landscape. Where in God's name are we?" he whispered, the words barely escaping his lips. Professor Armitage, surprisingly calm amidst the surreal horror, approached the railing. He held out a trembling hand, his fingers brushing the strange, iridescent air. "I believe," he said, his voice hoarse, "we have crossed the threshold. We are elsewhere." The crew, shaken and disoriented, began to murmur amongst themselves. Fear, raw and palpable, hung heavy in the air. We were adrift in an unknown dimension, a place that defied all logic and reason. As the unsettling silence stretched on, a new sound emerged. A low, guttural growl, emanating from the depths of the obsidian sea. It grew louder, closer, sending shivers down our spines. We scrambled to the railing, peering into the murky depths. The water began to churn, the surface disturbed by something large moving beneath. The growling intensified, becoming a deafening roar. Then, it surfaced. A creature unlike anything I had ever seen, or could have ever imagined, rose from the depths. Its body, vast and serpentine, was covered in thick, black scales that shimmered with an oily iridescence. Its head, massive and reptilian, bore rows of razor-sharp teeth. Two glowing red eyes, filled with ancient malevolence, fixed on us. The creature let out another ear-splitting roar, its breath a cloud of noxious fumes. It lunged towards the sea serpent asterisk, its massive jaws snapping shut. Panic erupted on deck. The crew screamed, scrambling for weapons, but what good would a harpoon be against a monster from another dimension? Captain Henderson, his voice hoarse with terror, roared, "Fire everything we've got." The ship's cannons roared to life, the explosions echoing across the alien landscape. The cannonballs struck the creature, but seemed to bounce harmlessly off its thick hide. It roared again, enraged, and slammed its massive body against the sea serpent asterisk, rocking the ship violently. We were outmatched, outgunned, trapped in a nightmare with no escape. As the creature prepared for another attack, I knew, with chilling certainty, that we were about to become its next meal. And in this alien dimension, there would be no one to hear our screams. Part 5. Whispers in the Static. The silence of the Sargasso Sea was a suffocating blanket. The oppressive stillness, broken only by the gentle lapping of water against the hull of the Demeter asterisk, amplified the growing unease within us. We hadn't seen another vessel since entering the Triangle's infamous boundaries 2 days ago. Radio communication had become increasingly erratic, voices warping into guttural distortions before dissolving into static. The GPS, once our lifeline, now displayed a chaotic dance of nonsensical coordinates, spiraling across the screen like frantic insects. Sarah, our resident marine biologist, remained glued to her sonar equipment, her brow furrowed in concentration. The readings were baffling, showing sudden, inexplicable drops in depth, as if the seabed itself were vanishing. "It's like we're sailing over phantom chasms," she murmured, her voice barely audible above the whisper of the wind. "And the water temperature, it fluctuates wildly within the space of a few meters." "It's impossible." Captain Hansen, a grizzled veteran of the sea, paced the bridge, his face a mask of grim determination. He was a man of few words, and the growing silence from him spoke volumes. He clung to his old-fashioned sextant, distrustful of the failing technology, his knuckles white against the polished brass. His eyes, however, betrayed a flicker of fear, a stark contrast to his usual stoic demeanor. Night fell, and the darkness seemed to deepen the strangeness. The stars, usually brilliant in the open ocean, appeared blurred, almost shifting. The air grew heavy, charged with an unseen energy that prickled the skin. It was then we started hearing the whispers. Faint at first, barely discernible above the creak of the ship, they seemed to emanate from the water itself. A chorus of unintelligible murmurs, rising and falling like the tide. They slithered into our ears, insinuating themselves into our thoughts, planting seeds of unease that quickly blossomed into full-blown dread. I tried to rationalize it, blaming the stress, the lack of sleep, the strange atmospheric conditions. But the others heard it too. Matteo, our engineer, a pragmatic man of science, swore he heard his name whispered on the wind, spoken in a voice he couldn't quite place, a voice that chilled him to the bone. Sarah, pale and trembling, claimed the whispers spoke in a language she recognized, a language older than any known human tongue. She said it spoke of shifting dimensions, of ancient beings, of sacrifices made to appease forgotten gods. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, weaving themselves into the fabric of the night. They seemed to be calling to us, beckoning us towards something unseen, something lurking just beneath the surface of the reality we knew. Sleep became impossible. Every shadow seemed to hold a hidden menace, every creak of the ship a harbinger of something terrible. Then came the lights, not the reassuring beacon of a distant ship, but something other. They appeared on the horizon, shimmering, pulsating orbs of iridescent light, hovering just above the water. They danced and weaved, defying the laws of physics, moving with an unnerving grace. We gathered on deck, transfixed by the spectral display. The whispers intensified, now laced with a note of anticipation. The air thrummed with an unseen energy, and the sea itself seemed to hold its breath. Captain Hansen, his face etched with a mixture of awe and terror, gripped the railing, his knuckles white. "What in God's name?" he whispered, the words barely audible above the rising chorus of the whispers. As we watched, mesmerized, the lights began to move closer, growing larger, brighter, until they filled our vision. The whispers reached a crescendo, a cacophony of voices that seemed to penetrate our skulls, drilling into our minds. The sea beneath us began to churn, swirling around the Demeter in a dizzying vortex. Then, the world shifted. The stars smeared across the sky, leaving trails of iridescent light. The ocean warped and buckled, the familiar horizon dissolving into a kaleidoscope of impossible angles and distorted colors. The Demeter groaned and shuddered, caught in the grip of an unseen force. The whispers, now deafening, seemed to coalesce into a single voice, a voice of immense power and age, a voice that resonated not just in our ears, but within the very core of our being. Welcome, the voice boomed, echoing across the fractured reality. To the in-between, the lights descended upon us, engulfing the Demeter in a blinding white light. And then, nothing, just a vast, echoing emptiness, filled with the lingering whispers of something ancient and unknowable. We were no longer on the sea, no longer in our world. We were somewhere else, somewhere beyond the veil of reality, trapped in a dimension that defied all logic, all reason. And the whispers, now softer, more intimate, seemed to be laughing. The silence in the cabin was thicker than the fog now clinging to the portholes. We were adrift, not just at sea, but somehow, unmoored from reality itself. The distorted constellations wheeled above, mockingly familiar yet subtly, chillingly wrong. After the incident with the chronometer, a palpable dread had settled over us. Mark, normally the boisterous one, hadn't spoken a word, his gaze fixed on some unseen horror only he could perceive. Susan, bless her soul, tried to maintain a semblance of normality, humming a tuneless melody as she tidied the galley, but her trembling hands betrayed her fear. I revisited the logbook, the last entry chilling in its simplicity. Chronometer malfunction. Time, unstable. Beneath that, in a shakier hand, Mark had scrawled, "They're watching." The word, they, hung in the air like a shroud. Who were they? What had caused the chronometer to spin wildly, its hands blurring into a silver vortex before snapping back, showing a date decades in the future? And why did the air feel so heavy, as though the very atmosphere were pressing down on us, suffocating us with an unseen presence? The radio, our only link to the outside world, remained stubbornly silent. Static, the white noise of the cosmos, was our only reply. I tried different frequencies, hoping, praying for a crackle of human voice, any sign that we weren't completely alone in this otherwhere. Night fell, a night unlike any I'd ever witnessed. The distorted stars pulsed with an unsettling inner light, and the moon, a grotesque, swollen orb, cast long, unnatural shadows across the deck. The sea itself seemed to glow with an internal luminescence, a phosphorescent green that painted the waves with an eerie, spectral beauty. Suddenly, a low, rhythmic thrumming vibrated through the hull. It started subtly, a barely perceptible tremor, but quickly intensified, resonating deep within our bones. Mark snapped out of his trance, his eyes wide with terror. "It's them," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "They're coming." Susan clutched my arm, her fingernails digging into my skin. "What is it, Captain?" she breathed, her eyes reflecting the unearthly glow of the sea. I didn't know what it was, but a primal fear, an instinct buried deep within my DNA, screamed at me to run, to hide. But where could we run? We were trapped, adrift in a sea that was no longer our own, in a reality that defied all logic and reason. The thrumming intensified, and the phosphorescent glow of the sea brightened, the waves now pulsing with the same rhythmic beat. Then, out of the glowing depths, they rose. Shapes. Vague, amorphous forms, shimmering and shifting, like heat haze given terrifying life. They were vast, towering over the small yacht, their edges blurring into the luminous water. No discernible features, no eyes, no mouths, yet I felt their presence, a cold, alien consciousness that seemed to penetrate the very core of my being. Mark screamed, a raw, animalistic sound born of pure terror. He scrambled back, stumbling over the deck furniture, his eyes fixed on the monstrous shapes rising from the sea. Susan whimpered, burying her face in my chest. The thrumming reached a deafening crescendo, and the shapes began to coalesce, their forms solidifying into something almost recognizable. They resembled ships, but ships unlike any I had ever seen. Long, sleek vessels, crafted from a material that seemed to absorb and reflect the unearthly light, their hulls pulsating with the same hypnotic rhythm. They were silent, gliding across the glowing water with an unnatural grace, their presence radiating an ancient, alien power. One of the shapes, larger than the others, drifted closer. Its hull shimmered, and a section of it seemed to dissolve, revealing an opening, a gateway into its heart. The light emanating from within pulsed, beckoning, inviting. Or perhaps, commanding. Mark, his face contorted in a mask of terror, pointed a trembling finger at the opening. They want us, he croaked, his voice barely a whisper. They want us to join them. A wave of nausea washed over me. Join them? Join these things? The thought was repulsive, yet there was a strange, almost hypnotic pull, a silent command emanating from the opening, urging us forward, promising something. I couldn't define it, but it felt like a homecoming, a return to a place I had never been, yet somehow, remembered. Susan tightened her grip on my arm, her body shaking uncontrollably. No, she sobbed. We can't. We have to get away. But how? We were adrift, surrounded by these entities. Escape seemed impossible. The larger shape drifted closer, the opening in its hull growing wider, the pulsating light intensifying. The thrumming resonated through our bodies, through the very fabric of the yacht itself, and I knew, with a chilling certainty, that resistance was futile. We were being drawn in, swallowed by a reality beyond human comprehension. The last thing I remember seeing, before the light consumed us, was Mark's face, twisted in a silent scream, his eyes reflecting the alien glow of the dimensional gateway that had swallowed us whole. The shimmering haze clung to the asterisk sea serpent asterisk, a greasy film that distorted the already unnatural twilight. It felt as though we were sailing not through air, but through liquid mercury. The silence, broken only by the creak of the ship and the slap of stagnant water against the hull, was heavier than any storm I'd weathered. Captain Eva remained glued to the helm, her knuckles white against the polished wood, her face a mask of grim determination. We'd passed beyond the shimmering curtain, and the world had changed. The sea, once a churning, angry gray, was now an oily, flat expanse of deep indigo, reflecting the unnatural sky like a polished obsidian mirror. There were no waves, no birds, no sign of life whatsoever. The air, thick and cloying, smelled of ozone and something subtly metallic, like blood. It tasted of static. Where are we? Whispered Ben, his voice barely audible above the unsettling quiet. He clutched his notebook, his usual scientific curiosity replaced by a raw, primal fear. The meticulously drawn diagrams of the anomaly, once symbols of his intellectual pursuit, now seemed like mocking reminders of our folly. Eva didn't answer. Her eyes darted from the compass, which spun uselessly, to the depth sounder, which registered an impossible depth, to the horizon, which seemed to curve unnaturally inwards, as though we were trapped inside a vast, dark bowl. The instruments, they're all useless, she finally said, her voice hoarse. It's as if the laws of physics themselves have broken. Days bled into nights, marked only by the subtle shifting of the alien sky's colors. The indigo deepened to violet, then to a bruised purple, before fading to a sickly green. We rationed our dwindling supplies, the silence around us amplifying every rustle of the food wrappers, every gulp of water. The constant, oppressive quiet began to fray our nerves, to burrow into our minds like a parasitic worm. We spoke less and less, each of us retreating into the echoing chambers of our own fear. Then, the hallucinations began. Ben was the first. He started seeing things in the periphery of his vision, fleeting glimpses of shadowy figures, distorted faces pressed against the non-existent portholes. He'd jump, cry out, then stare wildly around, his eyes wide with terror, before muttering apologies and retreating to his cabin. Soon, I started seeing them too. Twisted, skeletal forms that lurked just beyond the reach of the ship's dim lanterns. They seemed to be made of the same shimmering haze that hung in the air, constantly shifting and reforming, their empty eyes fixed on me with a malevolent hunger. Eva, however, remained stoic. She saw them too, I knew it. But she held onto her sanity with a fierce, almost frightening grip. She steered the sea serpent through the endless, still waters, her eyes fixed on some unseen point in the distance, driven by a desperate hope that I couldn't fathom. One night, under a sky the color of a decaying bruise, the silence finally broke. A low, guttural humming resonated through the ship, vibrating through the hull, through the deck, through our very bones. It grew in intensity, morphing into a rhythmic pulsation that seemed to emanate from the depths of the sea itself. The hallucinations intensified. The shadowy figures became more solid, more defined. They moved closer, reaching out with skeletal hands, their whispers, a chorus of distorted voices, filling the air. Suddenly, the sea began to glow. A phosphorescent green light rose from the depths, illuminating the water around the ship. We saw them then, creatures, things, I don't know what to call them. They swam in the glowing depths, vast, amorphous shapes that defied description. They were like living shadows, constantly shifting and reforming, their forms hinting at tentacles, fins, and eyes that weren't eyes. Ben screamed. He scrambled back from the railing, collapsing on the deck, gibbering incoherently. He clawed at his eyes, as if trying to tear out the horrifying visions. The humming intensified, the pulsating rhythm accelerating until it felt like our hearts would burst. The creatures rose higher, their forms becoming clearer in the phosphorescent glow. They were closing in. Eva finally spoke, her voice barely a whisper above the humming. "We're being drawn in," she said, her eyes fixed on the churning, glowing water. Drawn down. The sea serpent lurched violently. The humming reached a deafening crescendo. The creatures were upon us, their shadowy forms reaching out from the depths, engulfing the ship in a swirling vortex of phosphorescent green. I closed my eyes, waiting for the inevitable. The last thing I heard, above the humming, above the screams, above the churning of the sea, was a voice, a whisper, close to my ear, speaking in a language that was not of this world. "Welcome, home." The silence in the cabin was thick, broken only by the rhythmic creak of the tilting ship and Amelia's ragged breaths. The altimeter needle spun wildly, defying logic. We were both clinging to the railing, our knuckles white, watching the world outside warp and twist. The ocean, once a churning mass of black, now shimmered with an unsettling kaleidoscope of colors, like oil on water, only infinitely stranger. The clouds above, previously a menacing gray, pulsed with internal light, forming and reforming into impossible geometric shapes. "It's happening again," Amelia whispered, her voice barely audible above the groan of the ship. "Just like before, just like." Her words trailed off, her eyes fixed on a point beyond the railing. I followed her gaze. At first, I saw nothing. Then, slowly, subtly, a distortion appeared in the air, like heat rising from asphalt. It shimmered and expanded, the colors within swirling faster and faster, until it resembled a giant, iridescent bubble. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through me. This wasn't just a storm. This was something else. "We have to get out of here," I croaked, my voice dry and cracked. "We have to turn back." Amelia shook her head, her eyes wide with a strange mixture of fear and fascination. "It's too late," she murmured. "We're already inside it." The bubble expanded, encompassing the entire ship. The world outside vanished, replaced by a swirling vortex of color and light. The groaning of the ship intensified, the deck beneath our feet vibrating with an unnatural hum. I felt a lurch in my stomach, a dizzying sensation of falling, even though we were still on the deck. Gravity seemed to fluctuate, pulling us first one way, then another. The colors intensified, becoming blinding. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to block out the dizzying display. When I opened them again, the swirling chaos had subsided. We were no longer on the deck of the Sea Serpent. We were somewhere else entirely. The air was thick and heavy, charged with a strange, metallic scent. The sky, if it could be called a sky, was a swirling mass of deep violet and emerald green. Towering structures, unlike anything I had ever seen, rose from the ground, their surfaces shimmering with an otherworldly luminescence. They were not buildings in any conventional sense, but rather intricate, organic shapes that seemed to defy gravity, twisting and turning in impossible configurations. The ground beneath our feet was a pulsating, fleshy substance that yielded slightly with each step. I looked around frantically, searching for any sign of the ship, of the ocean, of anything familiar. But there was nothing. We were utterly and completely alone in this alien landscape. Amelia stood beside me, her face pale, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and awe. Where are we?" she whispered. I shook my head, unable to speak. I had no answers. We were trapped in a nightmare, a realm beyond human comprehension. A low humming sound began to fill the air, growing steadily louder. The ground beneath our feet vibrated with increasing intensity. In the distance, one of the towering structures pulsed with a blinding white light. The humming intensified, becoming a high-pitched whine that resonated deep within my skull. Then, they appeared. Figures emerged from behind the shimmering structures, their forms indistinct in the strange light. They were tall and slender, with elongated limbs and heads that seemed too large for their bodies. Their skin shimmered with the same iridescent colors as the sky, making it difficult to discern their features. They moved with an unnerving grace, gliding across the pulsating ground as if they were floating. As they drew closer, I could see that they had no faces. Where their faces should have been, there was only smooth, featureless skin. The absence of eyes, nose, and mouth was profoundly unsettling, creating an impression of blank, inhuman indifference. They surrounded us, silent and still, their presence radiating an oppressive, almost suffocating aura. The humming sound reached a crescendo, and I felt a sharp pain in my head, as if my skull were about to explode. I stumbled back, clutching my head in my hands. Amelia screamed, a high-pitched, ear-splitting shriek that echoed through the alien landscape. One of the figures reached out a long, slender hand towards her. Its touch seemed to drain the color from her face, leaving her skin ashen and gray. She collapsed to the ground, her body convulsing. I wanted to run, to scream, to fight, but I was paralyzed by fear, my body frozen in place. The figures closed in, their presence suffocating, their silence more terrifying than any scream. I closed my eyes, waiting for the inevitable, waiting for the touch that would steal my life, my memories, my very being. Waiting to be consumed by the nightmare that had become my reality. The humming intensified, the pain in my head becoming unbearable. And then, just as I thought I could take no more, everything went black. What if the Bermuda Triangle is a dimensional gateway? Part 9. The silence in the distorted cabin pressed in on Amelia, thick and suffocating. The humming, which had become the unsettling soundtrack to their nightmare, deepened, vibrating the very air they breathed. The compass, still spinning wildly, now seemed to emit a faint, high-pitched whine, adding another layer to the cacophony of unnatural sounds. Amelia looked at Finn, his face etched with a desperate fear she hadn't seen before, not even when they first plunged into the swirling vortex. He clutched the helm, knuckles white, as if sheer willpower could steer them out of this impossible situation. The once familiar instruments now displayed gibberish, fluctuating symbols and numbers that defied logic. The digital clock on the console flickered erratically, jumping forward and backward in time, as if time itself were unraveling. "It's getting worse," Finn whispered, his voice barely audible above the humming. Amelia nodded, swallowing hard. The air had grown heavy, charged with a strange static electricity that made the hairs on her arms stand on end. The metallic tang in the air, which had been faint before, now intensified, stinging her nostrils and coating the back of her throat with a coppery taste. Suddenly, a low growl reverberated through the cabin, emanating from somewhere beneath the deck. It wasn't the sound of the engine, nor the groaning of the hull. It was something organic, something alive. Finn exchanged a terrified look with Amelia. They both knew, without speaking, that this wasn't just a storm, a rogue wave, or any natural phenomenon they could comprehend. They had stumbled into something far more sinister, something that existed beyond the boundaries of their reality. The growl intensified, morphing into a series of guttural clicks and hisses, like some monstrous insect communicating in a language they couldn't understand. The floor beneath their feet vibrated with increased intensity, and a sickening lurch sent them both sprawling. Amelia hit her head against the chart table, a sharp pain lancing through her skull. She struggled to her feet, disoriented and nauseous. The cabin lights flickered violently, plunging them into momentary darkness, only to flare back to life with an unnerving green tinge. The humming reached a fever pitch, and the air crackled with static. Then, through the swirling mist outside, they saw it. A shape, vast and indefinable, began to coalesce from the swirling chaos. It was unlike anything they had ever seen, defying description with its shifting angles and impossible geometry. It pulsed with a sickly green light, mirroring the eerie glow of the cabin lights. It seemed to be made of the mist itself, constantly shifting and reforming, yet undeniably solid, undeniably there. Finn let out a strangled cry, pointing at the monstrous apparition. What is that?" Amelia could only shake her head, speechless. The sheer scale of the thing dwarfed their small vessel, making them feel insignificantly small and vulnerable. A wave of primal terror washed over her, freezing her in place. The guttural sounds beneath the deck escalated, as if echoing the presence of the monstrous shape outside. The deck began to buckle and groan under an unseen pressure. Cracks spider-webbed across the windows, the glass distorting under the strain. Suddenly, one of the windows shattered, imploding inwards. A blast of cold, otherworldly air rushed into the cabin, carrying with it the metallic tang now overpowering, almost suffocating. Amelia gasped, choking on the alien air. Through the shattered window, a tendril, thin and black as ink, snaked into the cabin. It moved with unnatural speed and fluidity, probing the air as if searching for something. Amelia screamed, scrambling back, her heart hammering against her ribs. The tendril slithered across the cabin, its tip splitting into a cluster of smaller, needle-sharp appendages. It brushed against Finn's arm, and he cried out in pain, a thin line of blood appearing where the tendril had touched him. Amelia grabbed a flare gun from the wall, her hands shaking. She aimed at the tendril and fired. The flare ignited with a whoosh, illuminating the cabin in a bright red glow. The tendril recoiled, momentarily stunned, but quickly recovered, its movements even more frantic now. More tendrils snaked through the broken window, filling the cabin with their writhing, inky blackness. The guttural sounds from below intensified, becoming a deafening roar. The cabin groaned and creaked, as if about to be torn apart. Amelia knew this was the end. They were trapped, caught between the monstrous shape outside and the unknown horror lurking beneath the deck. They had crossed the threshold, ventured into a realm beyond human comprehension, and there was no turning back. As the tendrils closed in, Amelia closed her eyes, her last thoughts filled with a chilling certainty. The Bermuda Triangle wasn't just a gateway. It was a trap, and they had fallen prey to its horrifying depths. The whispers intensified, no longer a faint murmur at the edge of perception. They scraped against the inside of Elias's skull, slithering through his thoughts like icy worms. They spoke in a language he didn't understand, yet somehow, he felt their meaning, a chilling blend of curiosity, hunger, and something far more ancient and malevolent. The distortion of the sky above pulsed, the emerald green deepening, swirling like a cosmic drain about to suck them all into oblivion. Amelia, her face ashen, gripped Elias's arm. It's getting closer, whatever it is. The compass in her hand spun wildly, the needle vibrating like a hummingbird's wings. Even the hardened sailor in her looked terrified. The air grew thick, heavy with an unnatural humidity that clung to their skin. The once familiar smell of the ocean was replaced by a metallic tang, like the scent of blood, only colder, alien. Even the waves, moments ago whipped into a frenzy, now moved with a slow, deliberate rhythm, like a predator stalking its prey. Suddenly, a shape began to coalesce within the swirling green vortex. It wasn't solid, more like a shimmering mirage, constantly shifting and reforming. For a moment, Elias thought he saw a colossal eye, larger than any creature he could imagine, staring down at them from the rent in reality. Then, just as quickly, it vanished, replaced by a swirling mass of geometric shapes that defied Euclidean geometry. What is that?" stammered Javier, his voice barely a whisper. He clutched the crucifix around his neck, his knuckles white. "I don't know," Elias admitted, his voice hoarse. He felt a primal fear gripping him, a fear that went beyond the rational, a fear rooted in the very core of his being. The whispering voices escalated into a cacophony, a chorus of unseen entities pressing against the veil of reality. The metallic tang in the air intensified, making Elias gag. He could almost taste it, a coppery, metallic flavor that coated his tongue. He felt a strange pressure building in his ears, like the sensation of descending too quickly in an airplane. The mirage in the sky solidified, taking on a more defined form. It was a structure of some kind, vast and impossible, a conglomeration of angles and curves that seemed to defy the laws of physics. Sections of it appeared translucent, revealing glimpses of a landscape unlike anything Elias had ever seen. Twisted, alien flora pulsed with phosphorescent light, while rivers of molten metal flowed through canyons carved from obsidian. Creatures, too bizarre to describe, flitted through the alien landscape, their forms shifting and changing with every blink. A wave of nausea washed over Elias. The world around him seemed to be tilting, the horizon blurring. He stumbled, Amelia catching him before he fell. "Elias," she cried, her voice strained. "We have to get out of here." But it was too late. The whispering voices reached a crescendo, drowning out all other sounds. The air crackled with an unseen energy. The boat began to vibrate violently, as if caught in a whirlpool. The emerald vortex in the sky descended, engulfing them in its unnatural light. Elias felt a tearing sensation, as if his very being was being unraveled. He looked at Amelia, her face contorted in terror, and then at Javier, who was muttering a frantic prayer, his eyes wide with fear. The world dissolved into a kaleidoscope of colors and shapes. The metallic tang filled his mouth, his throat, his lungs. He screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the vortex. Then, everything went black. When Elias opened his eyes, he wasn't on the boat. He wasn't even sure he was on Earth. He was lying on something cold and hard, the air thick with the same metallic scent. He sat up, his head throbbing. He looked around, his heart pounding in his chest. He was in a vast cavern, lit by a strange, pulsating light that emanated from the walls. The walls themselves were composed of the same impossible geometry he had seen in the sky, a chaotic jumble of angles and curves that seemed to shift and undulate. The air was filled with the same whispering voices, but now they were closer, more insistent. He was alone. There was no sign of Amelia or Javier. The boat was gone. Panic threatened to overwhelm him. He scrambled to his feet, calling out for his companions, but his voice was swallowed by the vastness of the cavern. He stumbled forward, his hands outstretched, trying to navigate the bizarre landscape. He walked for what felt like hours, the whispers constantly assailing his mind. He saw things that defied description, things that made his stomach churn and his sanity fray. Creatures that seemed made of shadow and smoke flitted through the air, their forms constantly changing. Rivers of molten metal flowed through channels carved into the impossible geometry of the cavern floor. Then, he saw it. In the distance, a shape emerged from the pulsating light. It was humanoid, but impossibly tall and thin, its limbs elongated and distorted. Its skin seemed to be made of polished obsidian, reflecting the strange light of the cavern. It didn't move, just stood there, watching him, observing him. The whispering voices intensified, coalescing into a single, chilling word that resonated deep within Elias's soul. Welcome, Part 11, The Shifting Sands. The radio sputtered, then fell silent. Static crackled, a mocking reminder of our desperate attempt to reach the mainland, to reach anyone. Amelia's face, illuminated by the flickering lantern, was a mask of despair. We huddled in the makeshift shelter constructed from the salvaged wreckage of the life raft, the alien landscape stretching around us, a grotesque mockery of earthly beauty. The purple-hued sand shifted beneath us, a constant, unsettling movement. It was as if the very ground we stood on was alive, breathing. The silence, broken only by the wind whistling through the strange, skeletal trees, was more unnerving than the cacophony of the storm that had brought us here. The storm, had it even been a storm? Or had it been something else, something designed to pull us into this place? The thought chilled me to the bone. We hadn't seen any of the creatures since the initial attack. The ones that resembled grotesque, humanoid bats. Their skin stretched taut over fragile bones, their eyes glowing with a malevolent intelligence. They had torn through the other life rafts with horrifying efficiency, their screeches still echoing in my nightmares. The memory of the screams of our companions being dragged into the swirling, purple mist haunted me. We need to move, I said, my voice raspy. The air, thick with the metallic tang that had been present since our arrival, seemed to cling to my throat, making every word a struggle. Amelia nodded, her eyes darting nervously towards the shifting sands. Where? There's nothing but this. She gestured helplessly at the desolate landscape. Away from the water, I replied, my gaze fixed on the dark, oily sea that lapped against the shore. The water pulsed with a faint, internal light, a sickening luminescence that seemed to beckon us closer. I knew, instinctively, that it was a trap. Whatever lurked beneath the surface, I wanted no part of it. We packed the meager supplies we had salvaged, a few protein bars, a half-filled canteen of water, and a tattered piece of canvas, and started our trek inland. The sand resisted our every step, clinging to our shoes like glue. The strange, skeletal trees offered no shade, their bare branches reaching towards the swirling purple sky like the clawing hands of the damned. The oppressive silence was broken only by the crunching of the sand beneath our feet and the occasional, unnerving rustling from within the twisted foliage. As the strange sun, a smaller, dimmer version of our own, began to dip towards the horizon, casting long, distorted shadows across the landscape. We stumbled upon a structure. At first, I thought it was a rock formation, but as we drew closer, I realized it was something else entirely. It was a building, or at least the remnants of one. The walls, constructed of a dark, metallic material I couldn't identify, were partially collapsed, leaving gaping holes that revealed a dark, cavernous interior. Strange symbols, etched into the metal, pulsed with a faint, internal light. They looked vaguely familiar, echoing the glyphs we had seen on the compass that had led us to this godforsaken place. Amelia gripped my arm, her fingers digging into my flesh. "We shouldn't go in there," she whispered, her voice trembling with fear. "We need shelter," I replied, trying to sound more confident than I felt. The temperature was dropping rapidly, and the thought of spending another night exposed to the elements was unbearable. Besides, something about the structure, despite its ominous appearance, drew me in. It felt significant. We cautiously entered the ruined building, the crunching of sand beneath our feet echoing eerily in the vast, empty space. The air inside was colder, heavier, and the metallic tang was even more pronounced. The glyphs on the walls pulsed with a brighter light, illuminating the interior with a strange, otherworldly glow. As my eyes adjusted to the dim light, I noticed something in the center of the room. It was a pedestal, made of the same dark metal as the walls, and on it rested a single object. It was a sphere, perfectly smooth and black as night, pulsating with a faint, internal light that matched the glyphs on the walls. It seemed to radiate an almost palpable energy, a silent hum that vibrated through the very air. I cautiously approached the pedestal, drawn by an unseen force. As I reached out to touch the sphere, Amelia cried out. "Don't," she screamed. "I don't like this place. Something's not right." I hesitated, my hand hovering just above the sphere's surface. A strange feeling of dread washed over me, a primal fear that whispered warnings in the back of my mind. But I was also consumed by an overwhelming curiosity, a need to understand the secrets this place held. Ignoring Amelia's pleas, I gently touched the sphere. The moment my fingers made contact, the ground beneath us shifted. The walls pulsed with a blinding light, the glyphs swirling and merging into a single, blinding vortex. The air crackled with energy, and a deafening roar filled the chamber. And then, everything went black. Part 12. The Shifting Sands. The silence in the distorted cabin was thick, punctuated only by the erratic sputtering of the failing radio. Elias clutched the useless device, its screen flickering with static, a visual echo of the chaos surrounding them. The compass spun wildly, its needle twitching like a trapped insect. Outside, the sky, once a swirling vortex of unnatural colors, had settled into a nauseating, pulsating green. The sea, however, continued its impossible dance, waves cresting and falling in defiance of gravity, forming impossible angles and transient spirals. We have to do something," Amelia stammered, her voice barely a whisper. Her eyes, wide with terror, darted between Elias and the grotesque, pulsating wall that had grown to encompass half the cabin. Its surface shifted and writhed, patterns of phosphorescent veins pulsing beneath a translucent membrane. Elias swallowed, a lump of dread clogging his throat. He knew they were trapped, caught between dimensions, between realities. The radio was their only link to the world they knew, and it was dying. He tossed it aside, the clatter echoing unnaturally loud in the oppressive silence. "We have to try and reverse whatever triggered this," he said, his voice firmer than he felt. He scrambled towards the mangled remains of the navigation console, his hands fumbling over broken wires and shattered screens. "Reverse what?" Amelia whispered, her gaze fixated on the encroaching wall. It's growing." He ignored her, his mind racing. The storm, the strange readings, the compass, it all pointed to a single, terrifying conclusion. The Bermuda Triangle wasn't just swallowing ships and planes. It was spitting them out somewhere else. Somewhere, wrong. "The magnetic anomaly," he muttered, pulling loose a panel, revealing a tangled mess of circuitry. "It has to be the magnetic anomaly. If we can stabilize the field." His words trailed off. He knew it was a long shot. The equipment was damaged, the anomaly was unlike anything he'd ever encountered, and the encroaching thing was a constant, pulsating reminder of their dwindling time. Amelia screamed. The pulsating wall had reached her, tendrils of luminescent green reaching out, probing, exploring. She stumbled back, tripping over a loose cable, and fell to the tilting deck. Elias spun around, his heart hammering against his ribs. He had to do something. Anything. He grabbed a wrench, its cold metal a meager comfort in his trembling hand. "Stay back," he yelled, brandishing the wrench towards the encroaching entity. It seemed to pause, its pulsating rhythm momentarily interrupted. The tendrils retracted slightly, as if considering his threat. He knew it was a futile gesture, but he couldn't just stand there and watch Amelia be consumed by this, whatever it was. He lunged forward, swinging the wrench with all his might, striking the pulsating wall. The impact sent a jolt through his arm, a sickening combination of physical and something else. He felt a strange, cold energy surge through him, like a static shock amplified 1,000-fold. The wall rippled where he struck it, the phosphorescent veins flaring brightly. A low, guttural growl echoed through the cabin, emanating from the wall itself. It was a sound that resonated deep within his bones, a sound that spoke of ancient, unknowable things. He stumbled back, his head spinning, his vision blurring. He could feel the strange energy coursing through his veins, making his skin crawl, making his muscles twitch uncontrollably. The wall began to pulsate faster, the green glow intensifying. The tendrils reached out again, this time with a renewed purpose, no longer probing, but grasping. Amelia screamed again, a high-pitched, desperate wail that cut through the oppressive silence. She scrambled backwards, trying to escape the encroaching tendrils, but it was too late. One of them wrapped around her ankle, its cold, slimy surface adhering to her skin. She thrashed and kicked, but its grip was too strong. Elias watched in horror as the tendril began to pull her towards the wall, towards the pulsating, glowing heart of the thing. He lunged forward again, grabbing her arm, trying to pull her free. "Elias," she screamed, her voice filled with terror. It's pulling me in." He pulled with all his might, straining every muscle in his body. He could feel the cold, alien energy coursing through her as well, could feel the life draining from her as the tendril tightened its grip. The wall pulsated, the guttural growl intensifying. The cabin tilted further, the sea outside swirling in a dizzying vortex of green. He knew he was losing her. He knew he was losing everything. And then, the world went black. The humming intensified, vibrating through the deck of the Sargasso *, a sickening tremor that resonated deep in our bones. The sky, already a swirling vortex of bruised purple and sickly green, pulsed with an unnatural luminescence. Captain Eva gripped the helm, her knuckles white, her face a mask of grim determination. Around us, the spectral ships, once silent, ghostly observers, seemed to be closing in, their spectral sails billowing in a wind we couldn't feel. "It's pulling us in," Matteo whispered, his voice barely audible above the humming. He clutched the railing, his gaze fixed on the closest spectral vessel, a magnificent three-masted galleon that seemed to shimmer in and out of existence. Its spectral crew moved across the deck with an unnerving fluidity, their empty eyes fixed on us. The compass spun wildly, the needle a blur. All electronic equipment had long since ceased to function, leaving us adrift in this nightmarish tableau, guided only by Eva's dwindling hope and the chilling certainty of our impending doom. The air grew heavy, thick with a metallic tang that made it difficult to breathe. The humming escalated to a deafening roar, and the sea beneath us began to churn, not with waves, but with an unsettling, oily undulation. The vortex in the sky descended, its swirling colors bleeding into the churning water, creating a terrifying maelstrom of light and sound. "Hold on," Eva yelled, her voice strained against the roar. The Sargasso lurched violently, tossed about like a toy in a giant's bathtub. The spectral ships closed in, their ethereal forms seeming to solidify as they approached. The galleon drew alongside, its spectral crew reaching out with spectral hands, their empty eyes burning into ours. Terror, raw and primal, gripped me, paralyzing me with its icy claws. Then, just as I thought we were about to be swallowed whole, the Sargasso plunged downwards, as if sucked into a giant drain. The roar intensified, morphing into a high-pitched whine that pierced my eardrums. The swirling vortex enveloped us completely, blinding us with its kaleidoscopic chaos. When the light finally subsided, and the whining faded to a low hum, we were no longer on the open sea. The Sargasso asterisk, miraculously intact, floated on a placid, black lake, reflecting the eerie green glow of a sky that was not a sky at all, but a swirling nebula of light and shadow. Around the lake, strange, alien flora pulsed with phosphorescent light, casting long, dancing shadows across the obsidian surface of the water. The spectral ships were gone. The humming persisted, but it was softer now, almost melodic. We were still trapped, but in a place that defied all logic, a place that felt both ancient and utterly alien. Eva slowly straightened up, her face pale but resolute. Where are we? She whispered, her voice trembling slightly. Matteo shook his head, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and awe. I don't know, but it's not Earth. We spent the next few hours exploring our strange new surroundings. The air was thin and cold, but breathable. The gravity felt slightly lighter than Earth's. The alien plants, which ranged from towering, bioluminescent fungi to delicate, crystalline flowers, seemed to pulse with a life of their own, their light shifting and changing in response to our presence. We found no signs of other life, no animals, no insects, not even the smallest microorganism. It was a sterile, beautiful, and utterly unsettling landscape, a testament to a biology we couldn't begin to comprehend. As we explored, the unsettling feeling that we were being watched intensified. We couldn't shake the feeling that eyes, unseen, were following our every move, observing us from the shadows cast by the phosphorescent flora. The humming, which had become almost background noise, seemed to fluctuate in intensity, as if responding to our thoughts and emotions. As the strange, green sun began to dip towards the horizon, casting long, distorted shadows across the black lake, we returned to the asterisk Sargasso. Exhausted and disoriented, we huddled together on the deck, trying to make sense of what had happened. It's a pocket dimension, Matteo said finally, breaking the silence. He'd spent hours poring over his tattered copy of Asterisk Hyperspace Asterisk, a book on theoretical physics that he'd brought along for the trip. A separate reality, coexisting with our own, but accessed only through gateways, like the Bermuda Triangle. Eva nodded slowly. But why? Why bring us here? The question hung in the air, unanswered. The humming intensified again, and the strange, alien plants around the lake began to pulse with a brighter, more urgent light. From the shadows, something moved. Something large. Something, watching. The slow burn horror continues. Part 14. The Whispering Reef. The distortion around the sea serpent intensified. The air crackled with an unnatural energy, and the sea itself seemed to boil, though it remained cold to the touch. The compass spun wildly, its needle a blur of frantic motion. Matteo gripped the helm, knuckles white, as the sky above shimmered and twisted into a grotesque parody of a sunset, hues of purple and green clashing against a sickly yellow. It's happening, Amelia breathed, her voice barely a whisper. Her eyes, wide and fixed on the swirling chaos ahead, reflected the unnatural light. The distortion began to coalesce, forming a swirling vortex of colors that seemed to suck the light from the surrounding ocean. Within its depths, fleeting glimpses of another world flickered, distorted landscapes, alien flora, and shapes that defied description. A low, guttural hum resonated from the vortex, vibrating through the hull of the asterisk sea serpent and deep into their bones. Matteo felt a primal fear grip him, a terror so profound it threatened to paralyze him. He wanted to scream, to turn the boat around and flee, but some unseen force held him captive, forcing him to witness the unfolding horror. Amelia, seemingly transfixed by the spectacle, reached out a trembling hand towards the vortex. "It's calling me," she murmured, her voice distant and hollow. "Amelia, no," Matteo shouted, grabbing her arm and pulling her back. Her skin felt icy cold. She snapped out of her trance, her eyes regaining a semblance of focus. "Matteo, I saw it." "Saw what?" he demanded, his voice strained. "Another world. A world, different, beautiful, and terrifying." She shuddered, wrapping her arms around herself as if trying to ward off the cold that seemed to emanate not just from the sea, but from within her own being. The humming intensified, and the vortex expanded, its edges reaching out like grasping claws. The sea serpent rocked violently, caught in the swirling currents. The air grew thick and heavy, making it difficult to breathe. The scent of ozone and something else, something ancient and alien, filled the air. Suddenly, a series of sharp, metallic clicks echoed from the depths of the vortex. They were followed by a low, guttural growl, a sound that seemed to tear at the fabric of reality. Mateo's blood ran cold. Then, from the swirling chaos, a shape began to emerge. It was vast, its true form obscured by the swirling colors, but its outline suggested something: serpentine. Something with immense, powerful coils that writhed and twisted within the vortex. "What is that?" Amelia whispered, her voice choked with terror. Mateo could only shake his head, his mind reeling. He had heard stories, whispered tales of monstrous creatures lurking within the triangle, but he had always dismissed them as folklore. Now, faced with the undeniable proof, he realized the horrifying truth: the legends were real. The serpentine form continued to emerge, its movements slow and deliberate. As it drew closer, Mateo could make out more details: gleaming, chitinous scales, bioluminescent markings that pulsed with an eerie light, and a pair of immense, multifaceted eyes that stared out from the vortex with an intelligence that chilled him to the core. The creature emitted a series of clicks and growls, sounds that seemed to resonate not just through the air, but through their very minds. Mateo felt a strange pressure building in his head, a sense of overwhelming dread and recognition. He looked at Amelia, and saw the same horrified comprehension reflected in her eyes. It was as if the creature was communicating with them, not through words, but through some primal, psychic link. And then, it spoke. Not with a voice, but with a thought, a feeling that invaded their minds, cold and sharp as shattered ice. "Join us, asterisk." The words echoed in their minds, a chilling invitation to a fate unknown. Amelia whimpered, her eyes wide with terror. Mateo, however, felt a strange pull, a morbid curiosity that warred with his overwhelming fear. A part of him, a small, insidious part, wanted to accept the invitation, to see what lay beyond the vortex, to experience the alien world that the creature promised. He knew it was madness, a suicidal impulse, but he couldn't shake the feeling. He glanced at Amelia, her face pale and drawn, and the protective instinct within him surged. He couldn't let her fall victim to this thing. With a surge of adrenaline, Mateo spun the wheel hard to starboard, turning the sea serpent away from the vortex. The boat lurched violently, throwing them both against the railing. The creature roared, a sound that tore through the air, a sound of pure, unadulterated rage. The vortex pulsed, its colors intensifying, as if trying to pull them back. But Mateo held firm, his grip on the wheel unwavering. He steered the sea serpent away from the swirling chaos, towards the fading light of the real world, praying they could escape the creature's grasp. He knew, with a chilling certainty, that the encounter had changed them, marked them in a way they could never erase. And he feared that the creature, whatever it was, would not give up so easily. It had offered them a glimpse into another world, and it would be back to collect its due. The whispers from the reef seemed to follow them, carried on the wind, a constant reminder of the horrors that lurked just beneath the surface, waiting to claim them. The distorted whispers, now a cacophony of inhuman sounds, seemed to emanate from the very air we breathed. They slithered into our ears, wriggling down our spines, planting seeds of unease that blossomed into full-blown terror. The compass spun wildly, the needle vibrating with a manic energy. North, south, east, west, all directions bled into a meaningless vortex. Even the chronometer, our last tether to familiar time, began to tick erratically, sometimes slowing to a glacial crawl, other times accelerating into a frenzied blur. It's changing us," Amelia stammered, her voice barely a whisper. She pointed a trembling finger at Professor Armitage. A thin, iridescent film, like oil on water, shimmered over his skin. It pulsed with an internal light, the colors shifting and swirling with an unsettling beauty. The professor, seemingly oblivious to the transformation, continued to pore over his notes, his brow furrowed in concentration. He muttered to himself, strings of arcane symbols and equations flowing from his lips like a dark incantation. The iridescent film spread, crawling up his neck, tracing the contours of his face, until his eyes, once filled with intellectual curiosity, now glowed with an alien luminescence. Fear, raw and primal, gripped us. We were trapped in a nightmare, the boundaries between reality and something far more sinister dissolving with each passing moment. The sky, once a bruised purple, now pulsed with a sickly green light. The air crackled with an unnatural energy, and the sea, previously calm, churned with an unseen force. A low growl rumbled from the depths. It wasn't the sound of an animal, not in any sense we understood. It was something other. Something vast and ancient, its voice resonating with the weight of eons. The yacht rocked violently, tossed about like a toy in a bathtub. The growl intensified, morphing into a series of guttural clicks and whistles. A language we instinctively knew was filled with malice. "We have to get out of here," I yelled, my voice hoarse with terror. But where could we go? The sky, the sea, the air itself. Everything was contaminated, twisted into a mockery of the world we knew. Amelia, her face pale and streaked with tears, clutched at a crucifix she wore around her neck. "Pray," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "Pray for deliverance." But even prayer felt futile in this alien realm. The whispers intensified, morphing into distinct voices, chanting in a language both ancient and terrifying. They spoke of forgotten gods and cosmic horrors, of realities beyond human comprehension. The air grew thick with a palpable dread, a suffocating pressure that crushed our lungs and constricted our hearts. Then, from the swirling green sky, something descended. It wasn't a single object, but a swarm, a writhing mass of iridescent tentacles, each pulsing with the same unearthly light that now covered Professor Armitage's skin. They descended slowly, gracefully, like predatory flowers unfurling their petals. The chanting voices grew louder, reaching a crescendo as the tentacles reached the deck. They moved with a horrifying fluidity, slithering across the wooden planks, exploring their surroundings with a morbid curiosity. One brushed against my leg, and I recoiled in horror, feeling a searing cold penetrate my skin. The touch left a burning sensation, a mark that pulsed with the same otherworldly light. Amelia screamed, a high-pitched, desperate sound that echoed across the desolate seascape. One of the tentacles had wrapped itself around her ankle, its grip tightening with each passing second. She struggled, her eyes wide with terror, but the tentacle was impossibly strong. It pulled her towards the railing, dragging her towards the churning, phosphorescent sea. I lunged forward, grabbing her hand, trying to pull her back. But the tentacle was relentless. It pulsed with an unnatural strength, pulling her closer and closer to the edge. I could feel her hand slipping from my grasp, her fingers growing cold and clammy. Suddenly, Professor Armitage, his eyes glowing with an unnerving intensity, turned towards us. He raised a hand, and the tentacles paused, their movements frozen mid-air. He spoke, but his voice was no longer his own. It was deep, resonant, filled with an alien authority. He spoke in the same guttural language the creature from the depths had used, a language that chilled me to the bone. The tentacles retracted, releasing Amelia. She collapsed onto the deck, sobbing hysterically. Professor Armitage approached her, his transformed face a mask of otherworldly serenity. He reached out a hand, the iridescent film shimmering over his skin, and touched her forehead. Amelia's sobs subsided. Her eyes, moments ago filled with terror, now glowed with the same alien light as the professor's. She stood up, her movements stiff and unnatural. She looked at me, a blank, emotionless expression on her face. And then, she spoke, her voice echoing the alien tones of the chanting voices, the voices that whispered secrets of forgotten gods and cosmic horrors. "Welcome," she said, her voice resonating with an unsettling calmness. "Welcome to the other side." The horror was not the monstrous creatures, nor the alien landscape, but the chilling realization that we were no longer fighting for survival, but for our very souls. Part 16. The Whispers of the Reef. The altered compass spun wildly, its needle a frantic dancer on a stage of distorted magnetism. The air, thick with the stench of brine and something else, something faintly metallic and sickeningly sweet, clung to us like a shroud. We were adrift, not just on the ocean, but seemingly adrift in reality itself. The sun, a sickly yellow orb, hung low in a sky that seemed too vast, too empty. The sea, usually a vibrant turquoise, was now a muddy, unsettling green, its surface undisturbed by any natural swell. It felt dead. We huddled on the deck of the Sea Serpent *, the once proud research vessel now a battered, drifting husk. The damage from the encounter with the shimmering entity was extensive. Hull breaches gaped like open wounds, the metal twisted and warped in ways that defied conventional physics. More disturbing were the sections of the ship that simply weren't there anymore, replaced by a shimmering, iridescent haze that pulsed with a faint internal light. It was the same unsettling light we had seen emanating from the depths before the attack. Silence, broken only by the creak of the damaged hull and our ragged breathing, pressed down on us. Amelia, normally the most vocal of our group, sat huddled in a corner, her eyes wide and unseeing, muttering to herself in a language none of us recognized. Captain Hansen, his face etched with lines of exhaustion and fear, clutched a dented flask, taking long, shuddering pulls. He offered it to me, but I shook my head. Alcohol couldn't numb the chilling certainty that we had stumbled upon something truly terrifying, something beyond human comprehension. The silence was finally broken by a low, guttural groan emanating from the depths. It wasn't the mechanical groan of a ship, but something organic, something alive. We instinctively moved closer together, our eyes fixed on the unsettlingly calm surface of the sea. The groan came again, closer this time, followed by a series of clicks and whistles that seemed to vibrate the very air around us. Sonar, Captain Hansen croaked, pointing to the dead screen. It's overloading. Something massive is down there. Suddenly, the water around the sea serpent began to churn. Not the natural churning of waves, but a localized, violent agitation. Shapes, dark and indistinct, began to rise from the depths. They weren't fish, or anything we could identify. They were amorphous, constantly shifting and reforming, like ink swirling in water. They pulsed with the same unsettling internal light we'd seen before, and their movements seemed to defy the laws of physics. As they drew closer, I realized they weren't solid. They were more like projections, shimmering illusions dancing on the edge of perception. They circled the boat, their movements growing increasingly frantic, their clicks and whistles escalating into a cacophony of sound that assaulted our ears. Then, from within the churning water, something new emerged. It wasn't amorphous, but solid, a grotesque parody of marine life. It resembled a colossal crab, its shell a mottled, iridescent green, its legs impossibly long and segmented, tipped with razor-sharp claws that clicked and snapped in the air. Its eyes, huge and multifaceted, glowed with the same unearthly light, fixated on us with predatory hunger. The crab creature let out a deafening shriek, a sound that seemed to claw at our sanity, and lunged at the asterisk sea serpent. Its massive claws tore through the already damaged hull as if it were paper, sending splinters of wood and metal flying. We screamed and scrambled back, our terror reaching a fever pitch. Amelia, however, stopped muttering. She stood, her eyes now clear and focused, but filled with a chilling emptiness. She walked towards the gaping hole in the hull, seemingly oblivious to the monstrous crab creature now looming over us. Amelia, I shouted, but she didn't react. She reached the edge of the hole and looked down into the swirling water. The amorphous shapes coalesced around her, their light pulsing in sync with the rhythm of the whispers now emanating from the depths. Then, she spoke, but it wasn't her voice. It was a chorus of whispers, echoing up from the depths, speaking through her. The words were guttural, alien, yet somehow, understandable. The reef calls, the whispers rasped through Amelia's lips. Join us, become one. Amelia smiled, a chilling, unnatural smile that stretched her lips too wide, revealing teeth that were now sharp and pointed, like those of the crab creature. She stepped forward, into the swirling water, into the waiting embrace of the amorphous shapes. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, as she disappeared beneath the surface, swallowed by the unsettling green depths. The crab creature, seemingly satisfied, withdrew its claws from the hull and sank back into the water, its glowing eyes still fixed on us, a silent promise of what awaited us should we remain. We were alone again, adrift on a dead sea, under a dead sky, haunted by the whispers of the reef, and the chilling knowledge that the Bermuda Triangle was not just a gateway to another dimension, but a gateway to a living nightmare. The air grew thick, heavy with an unseen pressure. The whispers, which had been a constant, irritating background hum, now pulsed, rhythmic and insistent, as if a colossal heart was beating somewhere beneath the waves. The emerald green of the sea, so alluring just moments ago, now seemed viscous, oily, like a slick of something unnatural clinging to the surface. The compass spun wildly, its needle jittering like a trapped insect. Even the normally imperturbable Captain Eva gripped the helm with white knuckles, her gaze fixed on the swirling anomaly ahead. "We're in it," she breathed, her voice barely audible above the throbbing whispers. "We're in the damn gateway." The ship, the siren's call asterisk, shuddered, a deep, groaning tremor that ran through its very hull. The lights flickered, casting grotesque, elongated shadows across the deck. The whispers intensified, coalescing into a single, chilling word, repeated over and over again. Asterisk. Join, 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 asterisk. Panic clawed at Elias. He gripped the railing, his knuckles bone white. The familiar nausea from the earlier tremors returned, tenfold stronger now, accompanied by a dizzying disorientation. He felt as if he were being unraveled, thread by thread, his very essence fraying at the edges. "Eva, what's happening?" he choked out, his voice strained. She didn't answer. Her eyes, wide and unseeing, were fixed on the swirling vortex of emerald green that now dominated the horizon. It pulsed, breathing like a living organism, drawing them inexorably closer. A low growl rumbled through the air, vibrating in Elias's very bones. He looked around frantically, searching for the source. The crew, frozen in place like statues, stared blankly ahead, their faces pale and drawn. It was as if some unseen force had stolen their souls, leaving behind only empty shells. Then he saw it. Rising from the churning water, just beyond the swirling vortex, was a shape. It was vast, colossal, its form shifting and swirling like smoke in the wind. It defied description, a grotesque amalgamation of angles and curves, flesh and metal, its surface covered in pulsating, bioluminescent veins. It was wrong, fundamentally wrong, an abomination that shouldn't exist in this world, or any other. As it rose further from the water, the whispers intensified, becoming a deafening roar that hammered against Elias's skull. The growl, too, grew louder, a guttural, primal sound that sent shivers of terror down his spine. He felt a cold dread seep into his soul, a primordial fear that transcended all rational thought. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that this was no natural phenomenon. This was something else. Something from beyond the veil, something that humanity was never meant to see. The creature, if it could even be called that, extended a tendril towards the siren's call. The tendril was impossibly long, stretching across the churning water like a grotesque, living bridge. It pulsed with the same sickening green light as the vortex, its surface covered in what looked like thousands of tiny, writhing mouths. The ship lurched violently as the tendril made contact. The metal groaned and shrieked under the immense pressure. The crew, still frozen in their trance-like state, didn't even flinch. Elias stumbled, crashing against the railing. He looked up, his heart pounding in his chest, and saw the tendril wrapping itself around the ship, tightening its grip like a constrictor around its prey. He knew, with a horrifying clarity, that this was the end. The siren's call was being drawn into the vortex, into the unknown, into the clutches of whatever monstrous entity awaited them on the other side. He closed his eyes, bracing himself for the inevitable. The whispers, the growls, the groaning of the ship, all merged into a cacophony of sound that assaulted his senses. He felt a sharp pain in his head, as if something was trying to pry its way into his skull. Then, just as he thought he could take no more, there was silence. He opened his eyes cautiously. The roaring, the whispers, the groaning of the ship, all gone. The tendril had vanished. The vortex, though still swirling ominously in the distance, seemed less active. He looked around, his heart still pounding in his chest. The crew remained frozen, their eyes still fixed on the horizon. But something was different. Their faces, though still pale, no longer held that vacant, soulless expression. Instead, there was something else, a strange, serene calm. A look of acceptance. Elias felt a cold hand grip his heart. He turned slowly, his breath catching in his throat. Standing behind him, her eyes glowing with an unnatural green light, was Captain Eva. But it wasn't the Eva he knew. Her features were sharper, more angular, her skin an unnatural shade of pale green. And in her hand, she held a long, shimmering blade, its edge pulsing with the same eerie green light as her eyes. She smiled, a slow, chilling smile that sent shivers down Elias's spine. "Welcome," she said, her voice echoing with the same otherworldly resonance as the whispers, to the other side. Part 18. The Whispers of the Deep. The air grew thick, clinging to us like a second skin. The oppressive weight intensified the further we descended into the chasm, a descent measured not in feet or meters, but in growing dread. The bioluminescent algae painted the walls in a sickly, pulsating green, revealing the rough-hewn rock, unnatural angles and curves suggesting a space carved by something other than geological forces. The rope continued its descent, a lifeline into the unknown. Amelia, pale and trembling, clutched my arm. "Do you hear that?" she whispered, her voice barely audible above the dripping water. I strained my ears, but initially heard only the echoing drips and the creak of the rope. Then, I caught it. A faint whispering, like a multitude of voices just below the threshold of hearing. It seemed to emanate from the depths, a sibilant chorus that spoke in a language I couldn't understand, yet understood instinctively as something deeply, profoundly wrong. We descended further, the whispers growing louder, more insistent. They slithered into my mind, coiling around my thoughts, a chorus of alien desires and forgotten memories. I saw flashes of scenes I knew I'd never witnessed, vast, impossible landscapes bathed in violet light, cyclopean structures piercing a crimson sky, creatures of unimaginable form writhing in some grotesque dance. "It's getting inside my head," Amelia choked, tears streaming down her face. "Make it stop, Thomas. Please, make it stop." I wanted to. God, how I wanted to. But I was powerless, caught in the same insidious current, the whispers weaving their way into the fabric of my being. I squeezed Amelia's hand, a silent promise I couldn't possibly keep. The rope finally stopped. We were suspended in a vast, echoing chamber, the bioluminescent algae casting an eerie green glow over everything. The source of the whispering became clear. The floor of the chamber was not rock, but a writhing mass of something else. It resembled a vast, undulating carpet of flesh, a tapestry woven from countless, interconnected organisms. Each pulsed with its own sickly light, contributing to the overall luminescence and the maddening whispers. It was alive, all of it. The whispers intensified, now a deafening cacophony that hammered against my skull. The flashes in my mind grew more vivid, more disturbing. I saw monstrous shapes rising from the fleshy floor, their forms shifting and changing, defying definition. They reached towards us with long, sinuous limbs, their silent screams echoing in the chambers of my mind. "We have to go back," I yelled, my voice strained, barely audible above the din. "We have to get out of here." But the rope remained still. We were trapped. I looked up, desperately hoping for some sign of rescue, but the opening above was just a distant pinprick of light, impossibly far away. The whispering grew louder, more insistent, the alien thoughts and images flooding my mind, threatening to overwhelm me completely. I felt my grip on reality slipping, the grotesque visions merging with the world around me. The fleshy floor began to bulge upwards, forming grotesque, pseudopod-like extensions that reached towards us, dripping with a viscous, luminescent fluid. Amelia screamed, a raw, animalistic sound born of pure terror. I closed my eyes, trying to shut out the horrors, but it was no use. The whispers were inside me now, a part of me. I could feel them pulling at my sanity, tearing at the edges of my mind. I saw myself joining the grotesque dance of the creatures below, becoming one with the writhing mass of flesh, my own voice joining the chorus of whispers. Suddenly, a sharp tug on the rope yanked me back to a semblance of awareness. I opened my eyes to see Amelia clinging to the rope with one hand, the other frantically sawing at it with a small knife she'd managed to keep concealed. "What are you doing?" I yelled, but my voice sounded distant, distorted, as if coming from someone else. "We can't stay here," she screamed back, her eyes wide with terror. "They'll take us. They'll make us part of them." She was right. I knew it with a chilling certainty. But the thought of falling into that writhing mass, of becoming one with the whispering horror, filled me with a primal fear that surpassed even the dread of what lay below. The rope snapped. We plunged into the darkness. The whispers welcomed us home. The air hung thick and heavy, pregnant with an unseen energy that prickled the skin. We stumbled through the distorted jungle, the alien flora casting long, unsettling shadows under the sickly green sky. The compass spun wildly, useless in this warped reality. Every rustle of leaves, every chirp of an unseen insect, amplified our growing sense of dread. We'd been following the cryptic markings etched on the cyclopean structure for what felt like days, though time itself seemed fluid, unreliable in this place. The symbols, a language of angles and curves unlike anything I'd ever seen, led us deeper into the heart of this alien world. Each step felt like a violation, a trespass into a realm not meant for human eyes. "I don't like this," Elena whispered, her voice strained. Her usually vibrant face was pale, her eyes wide with a primal fear. "I want to go back. Back to the other side." But there was no going back. Not anymore. The portal, that shimmering tear in the fabric of reality, had vanished as soon as we'd stepped through. We were trapped, adrift in a sea of the uncanny. The vegetation grew denser, the air thicker with a cloying sweetness that made me nauseous. The warped trees twisted towards the sky, their branches gnarled and reaching like skeletal fingers. Strange, bioluminescent fungi pulsed with an eerie light, illuminating the path with an unsettling glow. The silence, broken only by our own ragged breaths, was oppressive, amplifying the sense of isolation. Suddenly, a low growl rumbled through the undergrowth. We froze, every muscle tense, straining to hear over the pounding of our hearts. The growl grew closer, accompanied by the snapping of twigs and the rustling of leaves. "What is that?" Mark stammered, his hand instinctively reaching for the flare gun tucked into his belt. Before anyone could answer, a pair of luminous eyes appeared in the darkness between the trees. They were large, reptilian, and glowed with an unnerving intelligence. Then, another pair, and another, materialized around us, forming a semicircle. We were surrounded. Slowly, the creatures emerged from the shadows. They were tall and reptilian, their skin a mottled gray-green that blended seamlessly with the foliage. Their limbs were long and spindly, ending in clawed hands that dripped with a viscous, luminescent fluid. Their heads were triangular, with large, black eyes that seemed to bore into our souls. They moved with an unnatural grace, their bodies swaying rhythmically as if to some unheard music. Terror seized me, cold and paralyzing. I wanted to scream, to run, but my limbs felt like lead. These weren't just animals, they were something else, something ancient and malevolent. I could feel their gaze, heavy and probing, stripping away my layers of rationality, exposing the raw fear beneath. One of the creatures, larger than the others, took a step forward. It opened its mouth, revealing rows of needle-sharp teeth, and emitted a low, guttural hiss. The sound resonated deep within my chest, a vibration that seemed to shake the very foundations of my being. Mark, overcome by panic, fired the flare gun. The sudden burst of light and the loud bang momentarily startled the creatures, causing them to recoil. The jungle was bathed in a harsh, red light, revealing more of the horrifying creatures lurking in the shadows. We ran blindly, pushing through the dense undergrowth, the flare gun casting long, distorted shadows that danced like phantoms. The creatures were close behind us, their hissing and growling echoing through the distorted jungle. We stumbled and fell, our clothes torn by thorns and branches. The sweet, cloying smell of the vegetation intensified, making it difficult to breathe. We ran until the flare burned out, plunging us back into the oppressive darkness. We kept running, driven by pure adrenaline and terror, until we collapsed, exhausted and breathless, at the base of the cyclopean structure. The structure, immense and imposing, seemed to loom over us, its surface covered in the same cryptic markings. We huddled together, our bodies trembling, listening for any sign of pursuit. The silence was deafening, broken only by the pounding of our hearts. Then, slowly, a low humming sound began to emanate from the structure. The ground beneath us vibrated, the air thrumming with an unseen energy. The cryptic symbols on the structure began to glow with an eerie, pulsating light. We looked at each other, our faces illuminated by the otherworldly glow. We knew, with a chilling certainty, that something terrible was about to happen. The dimensional gateway, it seemed, was opening again. But this time, we weren't sure what would come through. And we were even less sure if we wanted to find out. The creatures, still out there, felt almost like a preferable alternative to whatever awaited us beyond the shifting, shimmering surface of the ancient structure. We were trapped between two horrors, caught in the nightmarish reality of a world not our own. Part 20. The Shifting Sands. The air hung thick and heavy, a miasma of brine and something else. Something ancient, something wrong. The distorted, fragmented landscape of this place pulsed with a sickening, organic rhythm. It was as if the very ground beneath us breathed, inhaling and exhaling in slow, agonizing gasps. The sky, if it could be called a sky, churned with colors that shouldn't exist, swirling in patterns that defied Euclidean geometry. Amelia clutched the fractured compass, its needle spinning wildly, pointing in every direction and none at all. Its glass face was etched with newly formed cracks, spider webbing across the surface like a shattered reflection of our sanity. The tremors that had started subtly were now more pronounced, the ground undulating beneath our feet as if something vast and unseen stirred beneath the surface. "This is it," Mark whispered, his voice hoarse, his face pale and drawn. "This is the end." "No," I said, my own voice trembling, but laced with a desperate defiance. "We have to keep moving. We have to find a way back." But even as the words left my lips, I knew they were hollow. We were adrift in a sea of madness, caught in the currents of a reality that bent and broke under its own weight. The fragments of other dimensions, other times, pressed in on us, their edges sharp and jagged, threatening to tear us apart. We stumbled onward, the alien landscape shifting around us. One moment we were traversing a beach of black sand, the next we were wading through a field of crystalline structures that hummed with an unsettling energy. The air shimmered, and for a fleeting moment, I saw a vision, a bustling port city, ships with sails of crimson silk, figures in strange, elaborate garb moving through the straits. Then it was gone, replaced by a desolate wasteland of twisted metal and bone. The tremors intensified, throwing us to the ground. A chasm opened up before us, a gaping maw filled with a swirling vortex of iridescent colors. The air crackled with energy, and the stench of decay intensified, overpowering our senses. From the depths of the chasm, a low, guttural growl echoed upwards, shaking the very foundations of this fractured reality. "What was that?" Amelia gasped, scrambling to her feet. Before I could answer, a shape emerged from the swirling abyss. It was vaguely humanoid, but impossibly tall and gaunt, its limbs elongated and distorted. Its skin was a patchwork of scales and something that resembled decaying flesh, stretched taut over bone. Its head was elongated, almost serpentine, with eyes that burned with an unholy light. A wave of pure terror washed over me, freezing me in place. The creature, whatever it was, radiated an aura of ancient malevolence, of something beyond human comprehension. It was a being from a nightmare, a manifestation of the very essence of this twisted dimension. Mark, however, reacted differently. He pulled out the ceremonial dagger he'd found in the submerged city, its blade gleaming with an unnatural light. He held it aloft, his eyes fixed on the monstrous figure. "Get behind me," he shouted, his voice surprisingly strong. Amelia and I obeyed, huddling together, our bodies trembling with fear. The creature took a step towards us, its movements slow and deliberate, as if savoring our terror. The ground trembled with each step, and the air crackled with anticipation. Mark lunged forward, the dagger held before him like a shield. He screamed a word, a single syllable that resonated with power, a word that seemed to echo from the depths of time. The dagger flared with a blinding light, and a beam of pure energy shot out, striking the creature in the chest. The creature roared, a sound that tore through the very fabric of this fractured reality. It stumbled back, its flesh sizzling where the beam had struck. For a moment, it seemed as if Mark had actually hurt it. But then, the creature let out another ear-splitting roar, and the wound began to close, the flesh knitting itself back together as if nothing had happened. The creature fixed its burning eyes on Mark, its rage palpable. It raised a clawed hand and swiped at him. Mark dodged, but not quickly enough. The claws grazed his arm, tearing through his clothes and leaving a deep gash in his flesh. He cried out in pain, stumbling back. The creature advanced, its movements now swift and predatory. We were trapped, cornered, with no escape. The chasm yawned behind us, promising oblivion. The creature loomed over us, its shadow engulfing us in darkness. And as its clawed hand reached out, I knew, with chilling certainty, that this was truly the end. The ground beneath us shifted again, this time with more violence than before. The landscape around us fractured and reformed, the creature's form flickering and distorting. A blinding light erupted from the chasm, engulfing everything in its brilliance. And then, darkness. A vast, all-consuming darkness that swallowed us whole. Part 21. Whispers of the Deep. The shimmering wall of distorted reality held us captive, a membrane separating us from what we knew and what we were rapidly coming to understand. The distorted echoes of our world, the spectral half-ships sailing on a phantom sea, were a constant reminder of the thinness of the veil. The air itself felt heavy, thick with an unseen energy that prickled the skin and tasted of ozone. We were trapped in the antechamber of another dimension, a place where the laws of physics held no sway, and the whispers of something ancient and vast gnawed at the edges of our sanity. Captain Eva's face, usually a mask of stoic determination, was etched with a deep weariness. The events of the past few days, the grotesque transformations, the loss of crew members to the shimmering depths or to the things that lurked within them, had taken their toll. Even Elias, the unflappable scientist, wore a haunted expression, his eyes darting nervously between the shimmering wall and the distorted reflections within it. We had tried everything to break free. Elias theorized that the dimensional gateway functioned like a lens, focusing some unknown energy to create the portal. If we could disrupt that energy flow, perhaps we could collapse the gateway and return home. We'd used flares, discharged the emergency beacon on repeat, even tried firing the remaining torpedoes at the shimmering wall. All to no effect. The projectiles simply vanished into the shimmering surface, swallowed by the distorted reality beyond. The remaining crew, barely a dozen now, huddled together, their faces pale and drawn. The constant, low hum emanating from the wall grated on our nerves, a subaural vibration that seemed to seep into our bones. We rationed the remaining food and water, each meal a silent communion of fear and uncertainty. Sleep was a luxury we could barely afford, haunted by nightmares of the distorted world and the creatures that inhabited it. The silence between us was thick with unspoken dread, the knowledge that our time was running out, a heavy weight on our chests. One night, as I sat on watch, a new sound pierced the constant hum. A faint whisper, almost imperceptible at first, but growing steadily louder. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, a chorus of voices just beyond the threshold of hearing. I alerted Eva and Elias, and we stood together, straining to decipher the whispers. As the sound grew louder, it began to resolve into distinct words, a language none of us recognized, yet somehow, understood. It spoke of ancient things, of cosmic cycles and the ebb and flow of existence. It spoke of dimensions layered upon dimensions, like the skins of an onion, and of gateways between them, opened and closed by the whims of forces beyond our comprehension. Then, the whispers shifted, becoming sharper, more insistent. They spoke of us, of our intrusion into this space, of our violation of the natural order. They spoke of judgment and of consequences. A cold dread gripped my heart as I realized the whispers weren't just speaking to us, they were speaking about us. We were being judged by something ancient and unknowable. Elias, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and morbid fascination, began scribbling furiously in his notebook, trying to capture the strange language. He muttered about the structure of the words, their similarity to certain ancient terrestrial dialects, yet their undeniable alienness. He spoke of a potential link to the very fabric of reality, a language woven into the cosmos itself. Suddenly, the shimmering wall began to ripple, the distorted images within it intensifying, swirling into a vortex of colors and shapes. The whispers reached a crescendo, a cacophony of voices that pressed against our eardrums, threatening to shatter our sanity. The air grew even heavier, the ozone smell intensifying, choking us. From the depths of the swirling vortex, something began to emerge. At first, it was just a shadow, a dark shape against the kaleidoscopic backdrop. But as it drew closer, it began to take on a form, a grotesque parody of something vaguely humanoid. Its limbs were long and spindly, its head elongated and disproportionately large. Its skin seemed to shimmer and shift, like the surface of the dimensional gateway itself, revealing glimpses of something truly alien beneath. The creature drifted closer, its empty eyes fixed on us, and the whispers intensified, coalescing into a single, chilling pronouncement. It spoke our names, each one in turn, a litany of doom echoing through the distorted space. Then, in a voice that resonated with the weight of ages, it uttered a single, horrifying word, chosen. The meaning of the word hung in the air, a chilling prophecy of what was to come. We were chosen. Chosen for what, we couldn't yet comprehend, but the sheer terror emanating from the creature, from the whispers, from the very air itself, told us that it would be nothing good. We were trapped in a dimensional gateway, judged by an ancient power, and chosen for a fate unknown. And as the creature drifted closer, its spindly limbs reaching out, we knew that our time in the antechamber was over. The horrors of the true dimension beyond were about to be revealed. The air in the cavern crackled with an unnatural energy, a palpable hum that vibrated deep in our bones. The glyphs on the walls pulsed with a sickly, phosphorescent green light, casting grotesque shadows that danced and writhed around us. The whispers, once distant, now pressed in, a cacophony of unintelligible voices slithering into our minds, twisting our thoughts, sowing seeds of paranoia. Amelia clutched at her head, a whimper escaping her lips. "It's getting worse," she choked out, her eyes wide with terror. "I can feel them, inside my head." I put a reassuring hand on her shoulder, though my own heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. The whispers were affecting me too, insidious tendrils of fear snaking around my sanity. The fear wasn't just of the unknown, but of losing ourselves, of becoming something other. We pressed on, the ground beneath our feet shifting from rough rock to something slick and organic. It pulsed with a faint warmth, and I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. Up ahead, the cavern opened into a vast, circular chamber. The glyphs here were larger, more intricate, carved into the walls with disturbing precision. In the center of the chamber stood a structure unlike anything I had ever seen. It was a swirling vortex of iridescent light, shimmering and shifting like an oil slick on water. Tendrils of energy snaked out from it, probing the air like sentient tentacles. The whispers intensified, coalescing into a single, deafening roar that resonated within the very core of my being. A pressure built in my chest, making it difficult to breathe. The air itself seemed to be vibrating, charged with a raw, alien power. Around the vortex, figures moved. Not human figures, but something else. They were humanoid in shape, but their bodies were elongated and distorted, their skin a sickly gray-green. Their eyes, huge and black, burned with an unnerving intelligence, and their limbs seemed to flow and undulate in an unsettling, unnatural way. They were the whispers made flesh. Amelia screamed, a raw, primal sound that echoed through the chamber. One of the creatures turned its head towards us, its black eyes locking onto ours. A wave of pure, unadulterated fear washed over me, paralyzing me in its icy grip. I wanted to run, to hide, but my legs felt like lead. We were trapped, caught in the gaze of something ancient and malevolent. The creature began to move towards us, gliding across the slick floor with an unnerving grace. Its movements were fluid, almost hypnotic, and I found myself unable to tear my eyes away. As it drew closer, I could see its features more clearly. Its face was gaunt and angular, with a sharp, beak-like nose and a wide, thin-lipped mouth. Its teeth were long and needle-sharp, glistening in the eerie light. Other creatures began to stir, their black eyes fixated on us. They moved with a predatory grace, circling us like sharks closing in on their prey. Amelia sobbed, her body trembling uncontrollably. "We're going to die here," she whispered, her voice choked with fear. I wanted to tell her that everything would be all right, but the words caught in my throat. I knew, with a chilling certainty, that she was right. We had stumbled upon something far beyond our comprehension, something that existed outside the realm of human understanding. Suddenly, the largest of the creatures, the one that had first spotted us, raised its hand. The whispers ceased abruptly, replaced by a deafening silence that was somehow even more terrifying. The creature's mouth opened, and a voice, cold and resonant, echoed through the chamber. It spoke in a language I didn't understand, but the meaning was clear. It was a greeting, an invitation to join them. I felt a pull, a magnetic force drawing me towards the vortex. It was a seductive call, promising power and knowledge beyond my wildest dreams. I saw Amelia, her eyes glazed over, moving towards the swirling light as if in a trance. The creatures around us beckoned, their smiles revealing rows of needle-sharp teeth. I fought against the pull, clinging to the last vestiges of my sanity. I knew that if I crossed that threshold, I would be lost forever. I would become one of them, a twisted mockery of my former self. With a surge of adrenaline, I grabbed Amelia's arm, pulling her back from the edge. She struggled against me, her eyes still glazed over with a hypnotic fascination. "No," I shouted, my voice hoarse with desperation. "We have to get out of here." I dragged her away from the vortex, fighting against the pull that threatened to consume us both. The creatures shrieked in protest, their voices rising in a crescendo of rage and frustration. We stumbled back through the cavern, the slick, organic floor clinging to our feet like glue. The glyphs on the walls pulsed with a malevolent energy, as if trying to hold us captive. We had to escape. We had to find a way back to our world, before it was too late. Before the whispers claimed us completely, and we became part of the nightmare that lurked beneath the waves. The chase was on. Part 23, The Whispering Reef. The air hung heavy, thick with the scent of brine and something else. Something acrid and alien that clung to the back of my throat. The storm, which had ripped through the distorted sky mere moments ago, had vanished as abruptly as it appeared, leaving an unsettling calm in its wake. The churning, kaleidoscopic sea had smoothed into an oily, black mirror, reflecting the sickly green sky above. The compass spun wildly, its needle a frantic dancer on a stage of madness. We were adrift, the yacht's engine sputtering pathetically, a dying cough in the vast silence. The sails hung limp, useless rags against the unnatural stillness. The three of us, myself, Elias, and Maria, huddled together on the deck, our faces etched with exhaustion and a growing dread. The island, the impossible island with its cyclopean architecture and unnerving silence, had vanished. One moment it was a looming presence, the next, swallowed by the shifting dimensions of the triangle. Elias, his eyes wide and bloodshot, pointed a trembling finger towards the horizon. "There," he whispered, his voice hoarse, barely audible above the gentle lapping of the waves against the hull. I followed his gaze, squinting against the otherworldly light. At first, I saw nothing, just the endless expanse of the unnatural sea. Then, slowly, subtly, it materialized, a low, dark line against the horizon, growing larger, closer. It wasn't another island, it was a reef, but unlike any reef I had ever seen. It was a jagged, skeletal construct of black coral, rising from the depths like the bones of some colossal, forgotten leviathan. The formations were twisted, unnatural, defying the laws of nature and geometry. Whispers seemed to emanate from it, carried on the faint breeze, whispers that slithered into my mind, unintelligible yet somehow understood, filled with promises and threats in a language I didn't know but felt deep in my bones. "We need to get out of here," Maria said, her voice strained. Now, but we were trapped. The engine was dead, the sails useless, and the reef was closing in, a predatory embrace waiting to claim us. A current, unseen yet powerful, pulled us inexorably towards the whispering darkness. Elias, who had been oddly silent since the island disappeared, suddenly stood, a strange light in his eyes. He began to chant, low and guttural, the words unfamiliar yet resonant with a power that made my skin crawl. The air around him shimmered, distorting, and the whispers from the reef seemed to intensify, responding to his invocation. "Elias, what are you doing?" I shouted, fear clawing at my throat. He didn't answer. His eyes were fixed on the reef, his face a mask of rapturous devotion. The current pulling us towards the reef grew stronger, the whispers louder, more insistent. I grabbed Maria's hand. "We have to jump," I said, my voice trembling. "Swim for it. Away from the reef. Away from him." She looked at me, her eyes wide with terror. "But where?" she whispered. "There's nowhere to go." I knew she was right. The sea stretched endlessly in every direction, a vast, empty canvas of green and black. But staying on the yacht, with Elias and his unsettling ritual, seemed a certain death sentence. As we prepared to jump, a shape emerged from the reef. It was vast, amorphous, a writhing mass of black tentacles and iridescent eyes that shimmered in the unnatural light. It rose from the depths like a nightmare made flesh, its form constantly shifting, defying definition. The whispers emanating from the reef coalesced into a single, deafening roar that vibrated through the air, through the sea, through our very bones. Elias laughed, a high-pitched, manic sound that chilled me to the core. He stretched out his arms towards the creature, as if welcoming an old friend. "I have returned," he cried, his voice filled with an unnatural joy. "And I have brought you a gift." The creature turned its myriad eyes towards us, and a wave of pure, unadulterated terror washed over me. I knew, with a certainty that went beyond logic, that this was no ordinary beast. This was something ancient, something powerful, something that had been waiting, patiently, for millennia within the distorted reality of the Bermuda Triangle. And we were its next meal. Maria screamed, a primal sound of pure terror, as the creature's tentacles reached towards us, dripping with an oily, black substance that shimmered in the eerie light. I closed my eyes, bracing myself for the inevitable. But instead of the crushing grip of the creature, I felt a hand on my arm, pulling me back. I opened my eyes to see a figure standing between us and the creature. It was tall, impossibly tall, its form shrouded in shadow. It held a staff in one hand, the tip of which glowed with an intense, white light. The creature recoiled from the light, its tentacles withdrawing as if burned. The figure didn't speak. It simply stood there, a silent guardian against the encroaching darkness. And as the creature retreated back into the depths of the Whispering Reef, I knew, with a flicker of desperate hope, that we might not be doomed after all. But the relief was fleeting, replaced by a chilling question. Who, or what asterisk, was this new entity, and what did it want from us? The triangle, it seemed, was full of horrors beyond our comprehension, each more terrifying than the last. And our journey through this twisted reality was far from over. The air shimmered, a heat haze in the frigid Antarctic wasteland. But this wasn't heat, it was a distortion, a tearing of the fabric of reality itself. The cyclopean structure, previously hidden beneath the ice, now pulsed with a sickly green luminescence, the glyphs carved into its obsidian surface glowing like malevolent eyes. We stood, the remnants of our expedition, a pathetic handful shivering not just from the cold, but from a primal terror that gnawed at our sanity. Captain Eva clutched the strange, octahedral artifact we'd recovered from the submerged ruin in the triangle. It vibrated in her hand, its facets mirroring the pulsing light of the alien structure. It was this, we now knew, that had opened the gate, this key to a dimension beyond human comprehension. We had theorized the Bermuda Triangle was a gateway, a portal to somewhere else. We hadn't understood the somewhere else was this. It's calling to it, whispered Dr. Singh, his voice hoarse, his eyes fixed on the obsidian monstrosity. He gestured weakly towards the shimmering air, where the distortion was deepening, widening. The resonance, it's increasing. The gateway is opening wider. A low, guttural hum emanated from the structure, a sound that vibrated not just in the air, but within our bones. The ground trembled, the ice groaning under the strain. The hum deepened, morphing into a rhythmic pulse, a sickening heartbeat that seemed to synchronize with our own. Fear, raw and animalistic, clawed at my throat. We were witnessing the birth of something terrible. Then, movement. Within the shimmering gateway, shadows coalesced. Not the defined shadows of physical objects, but amorphous, shifting darkness that wriggled and pulsed with the rhythmic throbbing of the structure. They swirled and danced like a macabre ballet, their edges blurring against the distorted reality. The air grew thick, heavy with a suffocating dread. The smell of ozone intensified, mingled with something else, something ancient and indescribably foul. We need to get out of here, I choked out, my voice a mere whisper against the oppressive silence of the Antarctic wilderness. Now, but we were rooted to the spot, mesmerized by the unfolding horror. The shadows within the gateway were solidifying, taking on grotesque, vaguely humanoid shapes. Their outlines flickered, shifting and reforming, their limbs elongating and retracting in unnatural ways. They had no discernible features, just smooth, obsidian surfaces that reflected the sickly green light. One of the figures, larger than the others, seemed to detach itself from the swirling mass. It drifted closer to the shimmering boundary of the gateway, its form slowly resolving into something that resembled a towering, skeletal figure draped in flowing darkness. It had no face, only a gaping void where a head should have been, a void that pulsed with the same green light as the cyclopean structure. Eva stumbled back, the octahedron slipping from her numb fingers. It clattered against the ice, the sound echoing unnaturally in the oppressive silence. The skeletal figure paused, its void-like head tilting as if listening. Then, with a slow, deliberate movement, it extended a long, spindly arm towards us. The arm stretched across the shimmering gateway, defying the laws of physics, extending impossibly far. The air around it crackled with energy, the ozone smell intensifying until it burned our nostrils. The skeletal hand, tipped with long, obsidian claws, reached towards us, its movement agonizingly slow, yet imbued with a terrible inevitability. Suddenly, a high-pitched whine filled the air. Dr. Singh, his eyes wide with a manic gleam, had snatched up the fallen octahedron. He held it aloft, its facets flashing erratically. "It's a resonator," he screamed, his voice cracking. "We can close the gate." He fumbled with the octahedron, his fingers tracing the strange glyphs carved into its surface. The whining intensified, resonating with the pulsing of the cyclopean structure. The shimmering gateway flickered, the shadows within it recoiling as if burned. The skeletal figure's outstretched arm froze mid-reach. But the strain was too much. The octahedron glowed with blinding intensity, then shattered in Dr. Singh's hand. A wave of pure energy erupted outwards, throwing us to the ground. The whining ceased. The pulsing stopped. The shimmering gateway stabilized, no longer flickering, but solid, a gaping maw into another dimension. The skeletal figure, no longer hindered, completed its reach. Its obsidian claws closed around Dr. Singh, lifting him into the air. He screamed, a thin, reedy sound that was quickly swallowed by the silence. The figure retreated, pulling Dr. Singh through the gateway. His screams faded, replaced by a low, guttural chuckle that echoed from the other side. The gateway remained open, a gaping wound in reality. The other shadowy figures within began to stir, their forms solidifying, their movements growing more purposeful. They were coming. We were alone, at the edge of the abyss, staring into the heart of cosmic horror. And we knew, with a chilling certainty, that we were next. The air, thick with the stench of decay and something else, something alien and fundamentally wrong, clung to me like a shroud. The distorted sky, a canvas of swirling greens and purples, pulsed with a sickening rhythm. I stumbled through the ruins of what I once knew as Miami, a city now twisted into a grotesque parody of itself, buildings folding in on themselves like melting wax, the streets choked with impossible geometries. The silence was the worst. No wind, no birdsong, no distant hum of traffic. Just the oppressive, expectant silence of a world holding its breath. The occasional, almost imperceptible shift in the landscape, a ripple in reality, was the only reminder that this wasn't static, wasn't over. It was merely waiting. I hadn't seen another living soul since the shift. Since the Bermuda Triangle, no longer a mere anomaly, became a gaping maw, swallowing ships and planes, then spitting out this warped reflection of our world. I clutched the tattered journal in my hand, its pages filled with my increasingly frantic observations, my dwindling hope. It was my only companion, my only tether to sanity. The entry from yesterday mocked me with its naive optimism. Perhaps I can find a way to reverse this. Perhaps there's a counter-frequency, a way to close the gateway. Foolish. Today's entry was simpler, still alive. I knew, deep down, that I wasn't truly alive. Not anymore. Not in any way that mattered. I was a ghost haunting a phantom city, a splinter of consciousness adrift in a nightmare. I reached the edge of what was once Biscayne Bay. The water wasn't water anymore. It was a viscous, iridescent fluid that shifted and pulsed with an internal light, like a living oil slick. Strange, bioluminescent forms drifted within its depths, their shapes too alien, too wrong, to comprehend. I looked away, my stomach churning. Then I saw it. On the horizon, shimmering in the distorted light, was a shape. A ship. Not one of the twisted, half-melted wrecks that littered this broken reality, but a pristine, gleaming white vessel, unlike anything I'd ever seen. It moved with an unnatural grace, gliding over the iridescent sea as if it were solid ground. Hope, a dangerous ember, flickered within me. Rescue? Impossible. But, what else could it be? I started towards it, the uneven ground treacherous beneath my feet. The air grew colder, the silence deepening, pressing in on me until I felt I could barely breathe. The ship grew larger, its details slowly resolving. It wasn't a ship, not exactly. It was more organic. Its hull seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting, and the white surface shimmered with an internal light. As I drew closer, figures began to emerge on its deck. Tall, slender figures, their bodies draped in flowing robes of the same shimmering white as the vessel itself. They didn't move, didn't seem to notice me. They simply stood there, facing the ruined city, their forms radiating an unsettling stillness. I stopped, a growing unease chilling me to the bone. Something about them, something about the ship, felt profoundly wrong. It wasn't rescue. It was something else, something far more terrifying. One of the figures turned, its face finally coming into view. It had no eyes, no nose, no mouth. Just smooth, unbroken skin, the same shimmering white as the rest of it. And yet, I felt its gaze, cold and ancient, piercing through me, dissecting me. It wasn't looking at me. It was looking through me, as if I were nothing more than a fleeting curiosity, a momentary ripple in the fabric of this shattered reality. The other figures turned, one by one, their blank faces fixed on me. I wanted to scream, to run, but I was frozen, paralyzed by an overwhelming dread. I understood then, they weren't rescuers, they were the architects of this nightmare. They were the things that had come through the gateway. The ship, if it could even be called that, drifted closer, its silent approach more menacing than any roar. The iridescent sea lapped at its hull, and I saw, with a sickening clarity, that the bioluminescent forms within the fluid were drawn to it, swirling around the vessel like moths to a flame. The figures extended their arms towards the ruined city, their movements slow and deliberate. And then, they began to sing. It wasn't a sound I heard with my ears, but a vibration that resonated deep within my bones, a chilling, discordant harmony that seemed to unravel the very fabric of reality around me. The ground beneath my feet began to tremble, the distortions in the landscape intensifying. The ruined buildings twisted and contorted, their forms becoming even more grotesque, more alien. The iridescent sea began to boil, the bioluminescent forms writhing in frenzied ecstasy. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the core, that this was the end. Not just the end of me, but the end of everything. The gateway wasn't just a portal between dimensions. It was a conduit for something ancient, something vast and unknowable, something that was slowly, inexorably, consuming our reality. The figures on the ship continued their silent song, and the world around me dissolved into a swirling vortex of color and sound, the boundaries of reality collapsing inwards. The last thing I saw, before the darkness finally claimed me, was the blank, white face of one of the figures, its non-existent eyes fixed on me, not with malice, not with hatred, but with a cold, indifferent curiosity. As if I were nothing more than a fleeting dream, a momentary flicker in the vast, uncaring cosmos. And then, there was nothing.